Amy Franklin.
And Carl Pennington Cross are here. Danielle Bailey is on vacation with her family and will not be able to join us. Anyone who would like to continue for the legislation. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and liberty and justice for all. Right. And is there a motion to approve the agenda? Any objections? Franklin has an objection to the agenda?
No objection.
All right. Agenda is approved without objection. Today's meeting, we have a lot of information coming in, so I would encourage board members to think about our board norm of leadership, and in particular, the line that says we will seek out and consider research and evidence to inform our decision making, even if those sources challenge our current beliefs and practices. So hopefully you'll all keep those in mind. Agenda item 2A, public comments. Is there anyone who would like to comment on a non-agenda item in our visitors? Yeah. All right. So right on agenda item 3, finance and personnel. And I think we need to do a presentation on Fund 10 revenue. Great. Yep. As we walk through the bits and pieces of the budget, one of the requests was to move to conversation on revenues. We're going to plan to spend some time at our January meeting discussing the finances in more detail and people pull out for special meeting on budget, so we'll have a lot more time for questions. Obviously, there's a lot of information on this, so if you would like to follow up with us after, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Okay, so if you're at the copy of the exact summary, and then also you need the microphone. You guys need the microphone. It's also a copy of our revenue limit worksheet. So I just want to keep the kind of set aside. In the second page of the exact summary, I highlighted the colors to match the revenue limit worksheet, so you see where the numbers from. So what I'm talking about. So I just went through, and we have our state, local, and federal sources of revenue that we get. The state one, I just started outline how it was. The revenue limit worksheet, where it's based off of our people enrollment, revenues that we have, FTEs, all of those in the revenue limit formula is what gives us our total revenue limit that we can forecast. So as you can see on the revenue limit worksheet, the separate single sheet, the first number that's highlighted green is 12,900. That is how much you get per pupil from per pupil month. And then the pink is the FTE, which is what our enrollment was for September of last year. So when I talk about the formula that's used, it's taking that 914, the total FTE, times 12,948, and that is per pupil month. Plus, we have a number of exemptions that are not recurring necessarily here, but the state gives us those exemptions, and then that's first thing, because every district can only lose 15% back. So you have different exemptions, make sure you don't fall below 15% of what you make. And so that gives us to the 13,963,579, which is the blue numbers, and that is the one that gives us our starting amount for our revenue limit with all of the exemptions. The other thing that I wanted to note in this is in line A, under section 10, is our non-reoccurring. So we have our non-reoccurring referendum that we receive 1.5 each year. So that is built in So as you can see, there's a lot of numbers, and if you run the limit worksheet, there's really aren't many numbers that you're able to manipulate, because so much of it is just coming from state, the federal level, and just different pieces that we don't have. But I just want to be able to show you like utilization is, different property, and numbers that we use, because we are. So that accounts for the state funding portion. The next piece, the next spot is the local. And I just kind of broke down what I wanted to go through was in the, and I thought that on the first page, the second column is source. What that is in the accounting is the object, or what is the source of the money. So in January meeting, you'll see more overall revenues and expenses, but a lot of it is tied to the source. So usually revenues are always by source, or what is the using object, and where is that source of revenue coming from, and expenses are typically by function, which is at 6%. So when you look at revenues and expenses, with DPI, there are certain codes that you have to use for expenses to fall in. So what I wanted,
Do you have an example of the 6-digit number in here, or is that just?
no, that would be expenses. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I just, before I searched.
No, and in expenses, you also have a source number too in an object, and that is what is the material that you're purchasing. So, for example, if we wanted to purchase something that's just a general instructional supply, it would be a 411, which makes it a supply, and then a 110000, which makes it instructional. So when we do our accounting, we have the general fund 10, and then it's an expense. And then where is that expense going to? Is it Parkway, the Glen Hills, or the district-wide expense? And then what is the expense? So the supplies, material, a contractor, whatever the case is, that's the 3-digit object. And then the 6-digit is the function, and what is that material being used for? So it could be something like, is it a general supply? So a 411 for art, and then that would be a different 6-digit code. So everything that we do for all of our accounting, we have to have fall within the DPI guidelines, but that's why when we code things, it's so important for it to be coded in the correct spot, because if you want to go back and look at the historical spend of things, it can be different depending on the person that's doing the accounting, because sometimes some people just put it into a general instructional and some people break it out by subject. So it might, for like my predecessor maybe would have put something in like a general 110000, but I know I want to see how they're broken down by art, by science, by all of those pieces. So I might go into more detail.
So are you indicating that historically there wasn't the detailed accounting?
Not necessarily, I wouldn't say necessarily the detail. I think it was just probably different way of doing it. And you could go to 5 different business managers and everybody will code it differently just because of how are they looking at the expenses. But that's why it can be difficult to look at historical expenses if you don't necessarily know how things were being allocated.
Even as a building principal, like we would have the option, do you want to just do two classroom teachers, or do you want first grade, second grade, third grade, what would you? So it just depends.
So then the next piece is going into what do we receive from a local standpoint. And here I just talked about we receive interest on our investment series account, but as we know, rates have not been great, so we really haven't seen much interest from those. We do have fees that we assess for general, like the general fee. We have a technology fee. We have an athletic fee for students that participate, and then a roller skating rental fee. So in that total amount, I just indicated what was the amount that Glen Hills was assessed and then Parkway was assessed, and this is just for this year so far. So we've collected 78% of our fees from Glen Hills and about 66% fees from Parkway.
And that can be for a lot of variety of reasons. Sometimes it's just, working with new parents that aren't necessarily used to Infinite Campus and making sure they see those. In prior years, the fees weren't collected as much with the pandemic. And so just trying to take into consideration, like people were not necessarily in the best financial like stability spot. So in the last year, we really ramped up what we've like just been sending out to families, like if you have outstanding fees, also for food service, because we had free lunches for a few years, but now, we have families that are applying for free and reduced, but they're responsible for a la carte and just, so now we have a weekly message that goes out that if you're over a certain amount negative, you get a message and then they are not able to get a la carte. Everybody will get a lunch all the time, even if your account is negative, but you wouldn't be able to get like the chips or the cookies or something like that for a la carte if you don't have enough money in your account. And then the last one is our federal funding sources. This one is, as you can see, is a lot more in depth of, this is made up of our grants, our Medicaid and our open enrollment. So as you know, we have an open enrollment expense for any student that open enroll out. And then we have money that we receive for revenue in for students that open enroll in. Typically, we like to be able to see a higher amount coming in than going out, but it depends on the needs of some of the students that we have that open enroll in. If they have higher needs and require more above and beyond what we receive in the revenue in, that can sometimes throw things off. And that was part of the issues last year, where we took in less than we were paying out for expenses. The other piece of that in special ed is our aid payment. This is made up of the prior year's expenses at the reimbursement rate, which is the total. So for example, last year we had 3.4 million in special ed, and we'll receive a 32% reimbursement rate, which is about $1,090,000 in revenue in 23-24. So as you can see, like with what we get from the aid payment, open enrollment for special ed, and then from the grants flow through in IDEA and Medicaid, it really only makes up a small percentage of what we pay in cost for special ed, but that it's also not including for all the other grants that we have. So we have title grant. A lot of our title grants were for ESL or for reading, and a lot of it to address learning losses and just different things that we can do to support teachers on the curriculum side. Medicaid is some districts, it's kind of a split, I would say. Some districts use it because they see, if you get a reimbursement of 60% of your expenses, it can be worth it, but it's only 60% of students that are eligible for Medicaid. So for some districts that don't have a high level of students that qualify, it doesn't pay for them to go through Medicaid. But for us, we have a 30% free and reduced population, which is a fair amount of students that we see that can be eligible for it. But just from seeing last year to this year, we had a variety of, or a range of 78,000 to 108,000. So the amount that we can receive from Medicaid can vary because of, again, the eligibility of the students that are that can receive Medicaid. And so that's what leaves us to still having a fair amount that we have to offset in the Fund 27 expenses that come from Fund 10. So, and then I know we kind of talked about it briefly, but at the end of the year, you essentially have your bucket of Fund 27 expenses, and that's full. And so each of these sources, so special ed payment, the grants, all of those take away and lessen the load in the bucket. But whatever is left in that bucket, Fund 10, it becomes a Fund 10 expense, and we have to clear, like empty out the bucket essentially. I guess the best way I can try to explain it. So at the end of the year, whatever we aren't able to get, and there really isn't a lot of new revenue resources for districts. The last budget, we were able to get a slight increase with special ed costs. But that again, certain things only are applied that can qualify for those costs. So we really don't see a lot of additional revenue each year that we can count on. And then there's the other ESSER and then E-rate and credit card. Those are just different things that we can have like miscellaneous revenues from. It's a lot of information, and I know it was I tried to break it down as best as I could in the different ways. So like Allison said, I'm always happy to have conversations if you want to ever dive into it deeper. So again, like last year, we're working with a grant writer. We are consistently trying to apply for different grants that we can do to help bring in revenue. We're trying to do a lot of advocacy from the legislative level and to continue to advocate for school districts to try and do more funding we can.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any questions or comments from visitors? All right, do we want to go around and be orderly about this and invite folks to comment or ask any questions you have for Lindsay? And also I've been told, though not by you, that if we have extremely detailed questions or have follow-up at a later time, when we are able to review this material in more detail, that Lindsay is apparently open to directly meeting with us to go over our questions and get up the learning curve.
And one of the other things I'll add is Allison and I have had conversations with Baird. And we have, we're looking to schedule another meeting to provide more of in-depth of, okay, these are their revenues, where are we looking to end for this year, and how do we need to plan accordingly?
So I have a few follow-up questions, but why don't we start over there and go around the table? How does that sound
Sure. I think
with Karn?
the issue with the special education funds is that, of course, it's a moving target, correct? So we can only base it on last year's numbers. Where are we this year comparatively with evaluations and qualifications?
I think we slowed down a little bit from last year, but we're still definitely getting a lot of evals, but we haven't had to add the amount of special ed staffing that we did last year to account for it.
I've gotten a couple of out of the blue evaluations that required us to bring in some outside agencies to assist with the evaluation that would be result, most likely, and then also contracting for services as well. That those are just not anticipated in the district, or you're an initiates referral for a 3-year-old that you didn't even know was out there. So there's been a couple of those.
We had a couple of students graduate last year that were a little bit higher cost, so some of that went away this year with students that have.
And those are ongoing conversations and analyses,
What, like the cost? Yeah.
monitoring kind of that ebb and that flow.
Kelly and I are constantly in communication, like if somebody needs additional services, if there's something outside of the norm, and we definitely have been trying to do some creative thinking and just different ways that we can make sure that the student has what they need and being efficient too.
Just real quickly, think I see the referendum on that sheet. Where's referendum fall in here?
So like I mentioned in the blue number, the
Yep.
referendum is encompassed into that total.
What?
It's encompassed into that total in the blue number.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's I was gonna ask the same thing. So you've got the per student, 12,900.
Yeah.
Plus the 2.1 million, that's
Yeah.
the referendum, operational referendum.
The non-recurring one, yep, the 1.58. Yep.
Oh, 1.5.
So it's 2,129,427 less 1.58 million. But you get the 400,000, so that's what I was gonna ask about, is the 436,439 and the 112,988. Where that
So
comes
those are the
from.
private school vouchers, and
Yeah.
like those are the ones that we have no control over.
Yeah.
That we get, we have to incur that cost for the private schools.
But it looks like that's a revenue, so that's a reimbursement.
Though it's a deduction from our revenue. So we have this amount of revenue, and then if you see in the description, it says private school aid deduction. So that's not revenue that we're receiving, that 436, that's a deduction from our revenue.
But that adds to the 1.58 million,
So you're taking the,
because it's A through I, the sum of that, right, which equals the 2.1 million?
so it's A through I, sorry. Sorry, it all auto calculates on the spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's
So-
the sum though,
Yeah,
right, because it's the sum of A through I,
yeah, yeah.
so, I mean, the.
Well, no,
revenue-
the 10 number, line 10, you're saying, right?
Yeah,
So that's the one above it, A through I.
I don't think there is an A through I above it,
There's 10.
10 A through I though.
Cause it's the 11.834. And then take those total, the 1.58, and then subtract it. And then you have 9 and 10 total to it.
Yeah, and the total 9 and 10 is 11.
Yeah.
But to get row 10, you have to sum A through I. And I guess I don't understand that. If that's an action, is that a deduction as in like the state reimburses us, like kind of like a healthcare deduction?
No, we're not getting a reimbursement for that. That's money that we're losing. We're getting it deducted from our revenue.
It's
But I thought-
reducing our revenue.
So I think it's hard to understand how it's part of an exemption when it financially harms us.
But it adds.
Oh,
to
I
the
can send
revenue.
you the revenue limit worksheet, then you can see the formula within that cell. So you can see, like, when you click on the 436, you'll be able to see how it's getting to everything that's there. That might help.
Andy, do you have any more questions
No, no.
about Ben's processing? Ben, do you have any more current? I see deep thoughts happening.
Well, no,
Answer.
it's just adding. So
It's
not-
confusing.
Not too deep, but, cause yeah, I mean, 1.58 plus 436,000 plus 112,000. Is line 10, 2,129,427, right?
The 1.5, yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah.
And then you add 9 and 10 together. And that's how you get 13,963,579 less the state aid. Cause state aid only improves mill rate. And then that's how you get the 13.2 million. So it looks like the voucher is adding to our revenue limit.
But we still end up losing it because we're paying out for the private school.
But it looks like we get reimbursed to give that money away.
So I to try to figure out a different way to explain it, and there's a nice link on the website that gives a little bit more detail. So I can share that with you, and then we can have a follow-up conversation. if you
Okay,
like.
sounds good.
I'm having exactly the same calculating thought as you.
Okay.
This should be money in.
Mhm.
It looks like they give us the money to give away.
Yeah.
And we're only looking at revenue, so I mean, I think what.
Oh, right, if we're spending more on the voucher.
So I
then
think what
we're
you're saying
getting
is
that.
revenue and I hope that we can get revenue, which adds to the revenue limit.
So it's
Then we
possible.
have to give the money back out.
So then it's
So it-
possible we're spending like $1 million on vouchers when we're only getting reimbursed.
Mhm.
But we are getting reimbursed, or we're getting covered at some partial.
So when it's kind of like open enrollment where we have revenue coming in, but we also have an expense going out. So we'll have revenue coming in, but we'll have it go out. So it's not like we're gonna see an additional 600,000 in revenue and not have any expense tied to it.
Oh, is this money we're getting from other schools?
No, it comes from the state to
Oh, okay.
offset the private school.
Oh, okay,
No, we don't get any money from the private schools.
yeah, so, okay,
All right, we're gonna stay on budget here. I'm gonna set up a meeting with you to ask
Okay.
some of my more detailed questions. But while it's on my mind, because these numbers confuse me so much. When I look at this, like this page 1 summary,
Mhm.
right, I add it all up and make a total for myself. I end up with a Fund 10 revenue summary of like 17.2 million.
Uh,
Okay,
Okay,
so I just added it up and I found 17.2 million. Then I went back and I looked at our budget publication. And it has a general fund total revenue of 17 million and a little change, so 17.0. So I'm wondering where that difference comes from. Are these numbers variable over time? Or is this pulled straight from the same budget that we looked at when we were voting on budget?
So some of it based off of the projections, we don't get final numbers for some of the things until November, or December.
So these
But
are,
there might be a couple of them that I can look just to see where the breakdown was in the model, give me the breakdown for it. I just did the big pieces for.
right, I mean, I know the tax levy isn't changing, but
No.
you know, it just put the question in my mind. Are these
Yeah.
numbers changing over time when we're looking at a budget? Because what it tells me is that maybe this isn't like a budget in the way we think of it. This is what we've planned to spend, but that some of these are live numbers. That they're presenting to us now.
Yeah, these numbers are the ones that we're using based on the model with the numbers that we've received from the state. So the Baird model gives us all of our most recent data. And I can, like, that was one of the things we looked at this afternoon. So I had a breakdown of all of our revenues, like line by line.
Yeah,
To show that total. And I guess I just didn't want it to be so
I got it.
overwhelming. So
Yeah.
I can definitely go through it more in detail to show where
Okay.
it ties out. to this.
Okay, next question. Open you know, I see we have 914 FTEs. And then I also, you know, the money our spending limit is not the same as how much we pay out when a student goes, right? They
So
take
open enrollment and
8,000
FTE are two different things. So the FTE is based off of our pupil count days, so
And-
third Friday and second Friday.
So that does not include open enrollments out.
No, so when we do the count, we subtract them out.
Okay. It's just strange that the number is different. I need to wrap my head
So,
around. open enrollment.
so to keep in mind, FTE is not literally, it's different than like actual butts and seats.
Yep.
So we have to,
Is that a term of art?
yeah.
Butts and seats.
It's just a
On
jargon.
the guys' website, I can search for butts and seats.
But it, because you look at what our total enrollment is, if you pull all the class sizes, and it's like 997, but we don't claim an FTE of 997, because we have to take out students that are open enrolled, students that are maybe enrolled part-time, that are homeschooled, like all of those different pieces. So that's where that 914 is the actual number of students that we get revenue for.
All right, and my next question is about special ed, the special ed aid payment.
Mhm.
That was the source 600, right? So again, you know, I went down the rabbit hole. I pulled out our budget publication, right?
Mhm.
And it says that we budgeted 1.5 million for that source 600, which is sped, right? So I'm looking
Yeah,
at.
but there's a lot of different things in that special ed, because it's the 610 through the 619. So
Yeah.
we have the special ed reimbursement, and then there's
So there's 400,000
Mhm.
coming from somewhere else.
like the other grants, smaller grants.
Okay, so, but those are not the same grants as
No.
the other categories of grants.
Because you have things like the reading grant or the educator effectiveness grant. Those are just a smaller one. Like I said, I can give you like the line by line to go through it.
Okay.
But it just gets to be a lot
All right.
to do every single line item.
I'm starting to think of Fund 10 as a revenue source for Fund 27.
That's exactly what it is.
That's how it's helping me clear my head.
Mhm.
So this is very helpful. So I finally get it. So if you're looking at Fund 27 revenue, Fund 10 is, so we're just stacking. It's a weird accounting game.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I've got. Anyone else? We're on
Thank you.
schedule. Thank you, Lindsay. Very helpful. Facilities, master plan options. I see our team here.
I think there's enough chairs.
We're 60 seconds behind schedule. Danielle will be proud. Say to stick the girls next to each other.
I like the new layout. Nice, yeah, more intimate, yeah.
The big tables down there.
Is it?
Would you like a mic?
I can talk loudly. On this one.
I have that carry on.
Well, let me do that, yeah. The night is young. Yeah.
That's why you see.
You're rotating the board in the middle a little.
Hey, all right, love that. Okay.
Actually, just hand it over to the boss.
Sounds great. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you guys again. You know, we've consistently since the summer, the goal has been to come to you regularly with updates to this process. And as we've talked along the way, you know, we started by just defining needs and looking at all the raw infrastructure needs and educational needs. We did tours of those buildings. And as we forecasted, we wanted to start to get community feedback. And we've done the first listening session, which I know a number of you, if not all of you, had a chance to sit in on one of those, and we have another one of those coming up, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And but tonight's an exciting night because this is where we start the dialogue and we can further develop responses to that need, right? And so a lot of times as we start to talk about that, we talk about concepts, we'll talk about solutions and options, and it gets exciting. We start to see pictures and it looks like solutions. We also, we see dollar amounts, we see change, right? We say change both in like things are different and like pocket change, right? Makes people nervous as we start to talk about that. Just know, very much vulnerable, open dialogue tonight. Okay, this very much is meant to be an open discussion. We're looking for feedback. This whole goal is that there's no agenda from the consultant side of the table. We're really, as our charge has been to help the district establish a long-term master plan, whatever's right for the district. Okay, and in that process, we're going to layer in feedback tonight. We have a staff meeting coming up later this month where we're going to get some more feedback based on what we hear from you. We have a second listening session. We'll come back to the board and then we'll do a survey. So we have lots of opportunity to continue to evolve what we see tonight and what may not be seen tonight that we want to get integrated. So really looking forward to that discussion. A couple things I just want to hit on right away. One, the one piece of the puzzle, we're talking the full portfolio of district buildings in terms of what those needs were. So we toured all three buildings. We've seen costs and needs at all three buildings. Tonight's focus is really on the educational component of that. Okay, so you won't see Good Hope in here tonight because it's been determined early on that that's not necessarily an architectural response, right, from a educational standpoint. Not to say there's not need there, not to say that's not a part of the master plan going forward. Not lost on this team. It's still very much integrated. You're going to see some summary slides where we hit on our assessment figures. So it's still there. We have not lost sight of that. But we can certainly talk more about that tonight as we go along. Previously for Good Hope, we had somewhat started to isolate that conversation just a little bit, just so as a group, as a board and as a district, we do firm up what the long-term vision for that property is, because folks will ask, they already have started to ask in those first sessions. We want to be sure we have a strong answer for what the game plan is, whatever is right. Okay, so we can certainly talk more about that as well. And then you're only really going to see it as always a summary of much more depth that supports everything on the screen. So as we start to talk about solutions and floor plans, as we start to talk about costs, the backup is there. If we need it tonight, we can reference it. If not, we can provide this follow-up. Does that sound good from the board? So the goal tonight really is just open feedback. What questions do you have? What are we missing? Are there ideas you expected to see and haven't seen yet? And just help us evolve how we can prepare for our next steps. Does that make sense? Elson, anything else we missed just from your goals? Okay, awesome. So with that, I think Devin.
Great, yeah. Thanks a lot, Mike. And I appreciate the introduction and what we're gonna look at, what we're gonna see. I expect you to jump in too, as we're going through the presentation, to layer in some of those additional pieces to remind us where we're at in this process as well. We're gonna go through a whole bunch of slides here, just super quick. I can click through them, but I think something that,
Can I pause you
Yeah.
Just 1 second. We have some visitors.
Yeah.
You are welcome to move on over. Yeah, that's to this side if you want to be able to hear Devin and see the
Screen.
screen better. Feel free to use it.
am I loud enough or
Yeah.
I can speak a little louder? Okay.
And if you have questions, when we break for questions, feel free to raise your hand and I'll try to remember to invite your questions.
Thanks, Carla. No, that's fine. That's great, because we want to make sure that everybody's involved. As Mike mentioned, we've had a number of opportunities to touch base with stakeholders, but there will be more. And something that I want to preface kind of the whole conversation tonight about is, you know, we're jumping into step 3 here, so concept development and the overview. Nick's going to go into more detail on what that specifically means, but you are going to see some floor plans like small on a screen. But that doesn't mean that anything is like a final design or anything, right? There are tons and tons and tons of hours if something were to happen that we would be spending time on to develop and to design those things. And I'll let Nick go into a little more detail on that in a minute. Right, we want to make sure that we were reminded of our guiding principles as well. And then just, I've seen a lot of friendly faces. You guys have all been at a meeting before. I don't have to go through who we are again, but right, BRH, Endorphin, and Cadence.
All right, and for those of you who've been part of this process along, you've seen this slide several times now, but it's good just to continue to remember the process that we're on. And Mike did a great job kind of teeing this up. Remember, we're in a 5-step process, and as Devin just noted, we are now going to start to look at step 3. So our prior engagements have been talking about those first 2 steps, really trying to establish what the questions are that we're trying to solve. Now, as we turn our attention to step 3, we're going to start to put out some potential solutions for discussion. And as Mike did a great job preluding, these are a first pass at what some solutions might be. And as we go through tonight, we're going to kind of test a spectrum. And that's kind of part of the process that I think we really kind of owe the community as part of this conversation to explore what else. Everything from very simple, you know, we have these buildings, maybe we like these buildings, maybe these are the right organizations in these buildings, and we have to just address proactively the maintenance. That's kind of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is maybe there's some things that are kind of radical, you know, maybe involves whole new buildings. The final answer typically in this process is somewhere in between. It's some combination of these different solutions. So the purpose of tonight is to really start to tee up that dialogue based on things we've heard already, things that we as a core planning team have been discussing. And it's absolutely true. We have to have feedback tonight from you all, from you guys here in the audience to help guide this process. And we'll continue to grow and iterate as we go through time. So as we go through step 3, remember, we're going to go on from here, finally into our survey. So that's our most scientific, specific, measured approach to getting feedback from the community. That's ultimately where we're going. And then if the community says, yeah, let's explore a question, then we'll go into support and help reiterate all the points that we've gone through. This is kind of a very, very condensed summary. Remember, our first step, looking at existing conditions of all of our facilities. We will not rehash all of our walks and all of our discussions there, but just keep all of that in mind. That's our assessment of where we are starting from a pure bricks and mortar standpoint, not looking at education, just where we are from our current conditions assessment.
With that, we took all of the information, and just a reminder with the money stuff, budgeting summary is based on conceptual scope. Some of it is consistent with historical costs of similar projects. It does include inflation, knowing when certain things are going to need to be spent. It's comprehensive of total project costs, any kind of soft cost, design, etc., associated with that, and reflective of the maintenance and building recommendations only. It is not final construction estimates. It is not based on a defined scope, more of this conceptual scope. It's not a detailed estimate. It doesn't include hazardous materials costs, operational costs, or any educational improvements. So as part of this, when we went through it in the past, got the next slide, we remember had those different levels of when things needed to be spent. So right now with the maintenance and the recommendations that we have $45.3 million spend across the 3 schools over the next 10 years.
All right, let's dive a little bit more into step 3. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Next.
Give me some security. So the planning process, right? You know, so most of you in this room have been involved in this process thus far in various stages, right? So, of course, critical first step is hearing very preliminary feedback from the community, which we have taken together into our core team. This happens to be a snapshot of a really fun day where we all got together in our office And start to put pen to paper, right? And start to think about all these things that we've heard. What are some potential solutions? And we're just exploring, as I said earlier, exploring a range of what could potentially happen here in these buildings. So that Devin alluded to earlier, that there's a lot more information behind. You're seeing very small images up on the screen. We covered our table in our main conference room with different spreadsheets of spaces, space programs. What are the kind of parts that we have to accommodate? So we think we have to accommodate these buildings, test fitting different types of additions, renovations, reconfigurations of our buildings. So this is just a quick snapshot into kind of the work that has been going on for some time now to get us to this this point tonight. So here again, that initial community feedback starts that exploration of long-range options. And I think that's key for us to always remember that we're not just thinking about what might happen in the next 5 years, 10 years. We're trying to think long-term and set up the district, set up the community for a strategic long-term investment in these facilities. So some of the things that we may be exploring with the community may not happen for quite some time, but we want to think very strategically. So whatever investments may happen in the facilities, they're done with purpose and intentionality. So what we really do not ever want to do is make an investment, even if it's a maintenance investment, in the short term, only to come back, say, 5, 10 years from now with another question that says, you know what, we're going to tear down or modify what we just invested. That's not good for anybody. So whatever happens in this process, we want it to be guided by this long range vision. So as we move forward in this process, we're going to start again, kind of with a broad lens, looking at different ideas, and we're going to continue to narrow these options. So the options that we start with tonight, none of them may be the final solution. We may come up with something that's entirely different from what is on the table here tonight. But always hearing, always listening, always reacting to what is being given to us is critical. And those will continue to develop. So yes, we're gonna see little tiny blurbs of color on the screen or on a piece of paper tonight. As we go further and further down the process and we narrow that lens, narrow that funnel, there'll be more and more refinement to it to get to a more specificity of what those long-term planning solutions may look like.
Okay, so y'all, yes.
Yeah.
Question, go to the top level, but here's my question, I don't know if it's potential or not. I see community feedback, I see administrative feedback, but we've got a board of 5 people doing an election that's gonna have the turnover, of 2 people at least, right? So my question, what is the board's role in concept development?
Well, that's a great question. So something that we have to be cognizant of as we have this conversation is, I'll say, starting with an admin level and continuing on to the board level. Whatever options that we continue to develop and move forward, we have to make sure that they're appropriate, that there's something that you as a board can support and the admin team can support. If this is not something that you all as a whole feel is appropriate for your community, then we shouldn't be taking it forward. Okay, it's important for us to explore it and have conversations like this. And you guys may, it's totally okay. You may look at the options that we present tonight and say, don't support any of them. We don't feel any of these are appropriate for our community as the elected representatives. That's fine, then it's on us to go back, respond to what you do feel is inappropriate or appropriate and create those things. Does that make sense?
Development.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is literally a very condensed snapshot. If I drew out the whole thing, it would probably be a wild roller coaster that turned and curved. I mean, you'll notice like the second community engagement isn't up here. This is really more of where we've been to date. There's gonna be probably another like 3 lines of this by the time we come back next time. And I think that's really important to go through like these various layers. Obviously, the board might going out to the staff soon.
And I
There's a
think,
lot more.
Andy, from a formality standpoint, the board has to take a vote at some point to take action. Right? So if there isn't a first step, it will be the board's responsibility to go to resolution and take action.
Well, you said,
If there is a next step.
I'm not trying to go off track, here,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the board vote should not be considered a formality, right?
No, I meant from a
It's
formal
yeah.
standpoint. From, kind of order of operations, in order for there to be a next step formally, the board needs to formally take action. Yeah, so
Out of formality.
it's not, yeah, excuse me,
Michael wear a black tie.
very formal.
I mean, 2 of us aren't gonna be here, and so, I mean, I'm assuming this isn't gonna be done in the next 3 months, but, the next time that we come out, we can't have one with the same here, so I just, I just wanna make sure that there's continuity of process and that, the board is, really being, part of that, not just at the end of it, where they, towards the,
And Amy, we talked about that transition piece quite a bit, and we talked about the fact that there is going to be some change on the board. And so the thinking is, like, we need all of you to get to survey. So we need all of your feedback and what you support and what you decide we're going to the community for to survey. And then it'll be the new board, then it's gonna take all the results of that survey to do the next steps, but like, this is the important to get to survey. With all of you guys. But there is gonna be, it's just gonna happen, right? Or there's gonna be a switch of people.
I think the work of that is an onboarding.
Yep.
I mean, that's where you make that transition. Maybe it's with a new board having a sort of onboarding.
Yeah.
Rounding back meetings
Gotcha.
where we go through in a little more detail, everything you've presented to us
Yep.
through the year. For those of us who will stay, might be 2, might be 3, who knows, right? You just don't know. Probably be good for us to rehash anyway, because we don't swim in this from day to day. It's
Right,
right.
So much.
And to the board's credit and to the admin's credit, this has been a very transparent process. Not all communities go this way, so we have been in front of you regularly. We've done videos that are on the website. We've done these listening sessions. So as much as possible, trying to be sure if there is a transition or when there is a transition of board, that it's again, a continuation of an ongoing effort.
Everybody take a deep breath. So, sorry, you stuck with me for a whole level 1, 2, and 3 for the maintenance list, so there's new terms. So when we go through this concept development, we really move into kind of this gray area. We're past the maintenance study, but we're not yet quite to real design. But we need to put enough on paper that Nicole's team can price all of these options as accurately as possible. So there's a lot of past experience that goes into that. And the easiest way to usually classify this, which is what you're going to see in the diagrams, which if you look for it in the presentation, look like a stoplight. This is kind of what those colors are referring to and are going to be kind of key terms going forward. So we have light renovation, heavy renovation, and addition. Light renovation, that's usually going to be a room stays basically what it is. So if a room is a box, it stays as a box. The walls stay the same, the windows stay the same, the door stays the same. We put in all new finishes. So we're doing carpet, we're doing ceiling, maybe we're doing lighting, maybe we're doing some cabinet upgrades. Basically, the space is still the same space, it's just refreshed. Heavy renovation, yeah.
All right, so with regards to accessibility issues, like, are there things that would be legally required to be changed that might not be like the doorways stay the same or the doors stay the same?
Yeah, so I'll preface it by saying that our maintenance numbers are gonna be in the numbers, so all of those are encompassed, but if you're talking about technicality of the code, there's a certain amount that we're required to address. So basically with every building project you take on, there's a certain amount of accessibility issues that you're required to address, with the intent being that as you slowly renovate, you slowly get your building all the way up to 100% accessible.
I just didn't want to have an inaccessible building. You might even-
Yes.
I heard us say this before, and to me, this is a matter of urgency.
Yes.
That's not a slow grind, becoming an accessible building.
Yeah.
right, For little people.
And when you see the diagrams, I think it'll make more sense in saying, like, at Parkway, we have good sized classrooms that have good sized doors. They just don't have the door width clearance to get in. That's included in the maintenance number that's rolled into the total number. And would be included, but that classroom is green for light renovation. Because that rectangle, that box is the right shape and size, and proportions, and it has good windows. We just need to really kind of refresh it a little bit. So the middle column there is gonna be heavy renovations. So that's anytime we start moving walls, moving doors, putting in windows. Just kind of more of what you would think of as gutting. So their systems change, we might be redoing HVAC, things like that.
Creating properly accessible bathrooms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes,
If I can be a.
Yep.
that would be a heavy renovation usually.
Repeat myself.
And then the last one would be addition, which is kind of self-explanatory. We are building a new appendage onto a building. So, we're gonna review 3 options this evening. that with the help of the administration team, were kind of what was narrowed down as these are things that seem really feasible, plausible. At some point, Mike will jump in with his own objectives, that are what we want to continue developing and presenting to larger group. Matt, I think.
You're spot on, yeah, and this, you know, this process started on paper as spreadsheets, right? Just, we talked, let's work in ideals. What are ideal grade configurations? What are ideal school sizes, right? Total number of butts and seats, right? I think we used that
It
earlier.
is actually a
How many
technical term.
kids in a building is the right number to have? And then that evolves, right? And what would that, let's start to test fit those, and what would it look like practically from, an educational standpoint to change grade configuration models in a building? What are the pros and cons to that? And we did meet with the principals and got some feedback from them in this process. And so what you see tonight is kind of an evolved set of dialogues that have led to these 3 scenarios for discussion.
And the numbering is gonna seem a little nonsensical tonight
Yeah.
because it came from a much larger matrix of things that it was winnowed down from. And went back and forth on if we should renumber them and decided that would throw everyone off at this point, so just bear with us. So the first option that we'll be reviewing, and these will all go into
Later on.
great detail. I think Carla's just sitting here going, where's one? Is the existing grade configuration. So if you think about where all of the grades are living in their existing buildings today, would be maintaining that and bringing both buildings that we're using for our 4K through 8th graders up to a current educational adequacy standard. So basically renovating to make them like new, like we would build a new, brand new school, with space added to accommodate full day 4K at Parkway. So that does require additional classroom space. And I won't get too deep into that, because we will go into each option in detail, but did want to just note that all 3 of these are saying all spaces identified in educational space adequacy are added and changed, and all maintenance items and recommendations identified in the facilities condition are addressed. So that's, again, going back into that kind of question about security, accessibility, maintenance items. This is all 10 years of maintenance items addressed. So again, we're talking about master plan. What we're seeing tonight is truly like all inclusive, the full umbrella, the perfect picture. Never what actually gets built. Just want to preface all of that. So then we have 1B, which is 4th grade moves to Parkway. So we have Parkway as our 4K through 4th grade. So again, adding some space for that full day 4K, adding space for 4th grade. As we know, there's a good amount of square footage here, so it does free up some space for additional community programming that we'll look at as a potential option as a master plan. And the third option would be 2A, which is a new intermediate school on the Glen Hills site. So this building would become 6th through 8th. There would be a new building built on this property that would be 3rd through 5th, and then the Parkway would be 4K through 2nd. You're gonna see a lot of repeated bullet points over there. They kind of just add on, if you can imagine. Added on bullet points there that are different are new intermediate school built on this site, as mentioned, and then significant community space here at Glen Hills would be available if that was of desire.
So in that, Nicole, just to queue up, the 1B scenario would bring the district back to the grade configuration it was prior to moving 4th grade over. And historically, the understanding is that was really driven by capacity at Parkway, and the opportunity here to simply slide that grade of students over and accommodate them without significant addition or investment in that building. So in essence, would be to shift back to or right size that building to get back to the configuration that it was prior to that. Okay, so that's kind of the thought process there. Tie us back to that. And then the 2A scenario, I think important to note there, back to that notion of working in ideals, the conversation with leadership academically was 4-8 today, atypical as a model. Really 4th grade is that more elementary curriculum or more middle school curriculum, really healthy conversation. Same thing then steps naturally to 5th grade. Should that feel more like elementary or more like a middle school? What would the impacts be if it weren't in the middle school? And obviously, a lot of that will tie to specials and some of the extracurriculars and things that enrich that 5th graders experience. So the feedback was, if in fact 5th was not in this building, ideally they'd still be able to access the same programming, queue up, potentially keeping them on the same site. So that's really the background behind why this as a new building option, if Fifth wasn't here and we kind of leveled off the right sizing of other buildings, building new kept fifth grade on the same site. Whether that's enough reason to do it or hands out enough justification, all open for discussion, but that's at least the backstory to kind of cue up that data.
So one question I had when I read this, I mean, that goes, now let's talk about base options. Where's Good Hope in all
Yep.
this?
Yeah, so great question. So I think as you see in options 1A and 1B, very clearly, we think by right sizing the two buildings, we're creating targeted grade configurations, whether it's we are comfortable the way we are, and we don't want to change, that's 1A. So we right size the buildings to support the grade configurations we have. Or we feel strongly enough that fourth grade should be with elementary long-term, that it's worth investing in an addition to move them over, and we balance out between the two buildings. We don't necessarily know that we need Good Hope from a educational solution. Back to the prelude to start the conversation today, this is really education focused. Haven't lost sight of it. There's still need there, right? We still know we have $9+ million of infrastructure potentially needed there. It's not off the table for dialogue. It's just not a part of this core educational piece. And I just queued up, Andy, the 2A being the new building that would suggest now we're at a 3-building solution when we have 3 buildings today. The only reason that 3rd building is being added really is just to play out the scenario of 5th grade being with elementary, not located in this building. What are the pros and cons for that?
So I guess not getting, but, and I know you got a lot of, questions, but I guess I don't understand why Good Hope is just being ignored. And are we saying Good Hope is going to be, not used? Are we saying we're going to renovate it separate to it? Because, this is all our property, and this is a building we spent a lot of time talking about, and putting money into budget like that. So I just want to understand why, for example, it wouldn't be there.
Yeah, well, I think the scenario in these dialogues, the assumption is it's status quo. That we're not making change to that. We haven't been given direction. No one's taken action on changing how we're using Good Hope in any way. What we're just suggesting in this scenario is that these options haven't played out, that being an ideal site for our education purposes. Is
Why not?
why not?
Why, I'm just trying to, I mean, I had one about,
Yep.
why is Good Hope not in, ideal site for these purposes?
So it would suggest it's more ideal than the 2 buildings we're functioning in right now. Is that your?
No, Can I?
Yeah.
So I think what Andy's asking, I could be wrong, I think we're all kind of thinking about this, like.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a scenario that was considered before we went into these 3 that involved, say, some group of classes being at Good Hope instead of at a 3rd new facility, right? I think Andy's pondering like why that's not on the menu of potential options. And, I know that a lot of what we talked about during the walkthroughs was that Good Hope is just it's a something show if we're gonna try to put classrooms in there, right? Because it does not meet any standard. But still, it does beg the question, if we're talking about an option that involves a 3rd building, we already have a 3rd building. And as we talk about facilities, upgrades, and modernization, we own a 3rd building that would also need to be part of the story, right? Of what we're committing to.
Sure.
If we're gonna keep it and continue to rent it, we would need to upgrade it. We got what, $9 million in anticipated costs anyway.
And
You see what I'm saying? I mean, I think that's where you're going.
I did.
Sort of asking why that's not part of it.
And to use your parlance, it's a blank show. It is in fact, problematic and the needs of finding the use and then renovating the use are problematic. I mean, for the sake of argument, let's talk about that, but and I think I understand a little bit more, you're talking about education, but for me, if we're talking about planning, we also have the community component, and we are using that building, and it does have athletic fields for that space, does have a lot of things that the community uses. So I'm concerned that if we don't have that as part of the discussion, and just whatever the heck it is, it just can get lost in the shuffle.
And I would say too, that for me, the items 1B and 2A talking about adding significant community space here. that raised my red flag, and I inferred from it, we talked about this earlier, oh, there must be implicit in this an idea that we're unloading Good Hope.
It's-
Right, so
I think it's
that's
more
the
of a-
question mark that's raised.
And it was interesting because when we talked about that, I hadn't even made that connection because we were just looking at, so if we suddenly have all this space at Glen Hills, how can we utilize that space? Early in some of our conversations, one of the things we talked about, and again, maybe this isn't the big priority, but one of the things we talked about is, do families want to drop kids off potentially at 3 sites? Because when we did early talk about Good Hope, like, could that be an early childhood, could Parkway then be something else? And could this be middle school? We wondered about that, and we talked about, could we have 2 elementary schools and a middle school? We looked at numbers and we looked at the idea that we felt the community appreciated the cohort traveling together, not having to try to draw lines and have inequities perhaps into elementary schools. So we did discuss that as an option. It
So,
just, yeah, plus
yeah.
and cost,
Declining enrollment, right?
no.
Or that's what the. No, I thought that
Slightly.
was projected.
Yeah,
And we have enough, we have adequate space.
yeah, they showed negative 30 we would say over 15 years, a drop of 30 students, that's fairly.
Okay,
And then Roffers had some that were coming back in.
But our space was adequate.
Mhm.
In fact, we have more space than we need right now, so why would we build an additional school?
So maybe we wouldn't,
Yeah.
but we looked at grade level configurations, this 4th grade belong.
Also, you're with Cadence, right? Okay. So when you say we. Cause they're from PRA.
We,
right?
we have looked at it collectively as a team, so we have core team meetings when we're all together on calls and have discussions and.
Yeah, I say we collectively, I say we universally to admin and the feedback we've gotten from the community and leadership. Yeah, that's the hope this so far. Yep, yeah. Exactly the dialogue we hope
Yeah.
for, right? This is healthy. This is why we wanted to talk about all of this. I think, Andy, your feedback is great. If it's a matter of being sure we respectfully don't lose track of that in the conversation, keep prioritizing that, we can absolutely add that to this slide deck and be sure we're showing that in our graphics going forward. It will continue to bring forth with the community questions about what is the plan for that building, which does mean the board needs to continue to have an open dialogue about what is the plan for that long term. And if it is to commit to it, if we're saying educationally, probably not a direct solution or a direct need, if that's where we land in these conversations, it does, I think, open up the dialogue is continuing on with where we're at. Is that the path? If so, great. We just need to start to plan for the infrastructure needs.
About public land, without talking about all public land. Yeah, so, I mean, and we've had the discussion, right, we, you know, in your presentations and we've gone to the vote, I mean, that's part of the discussion, so it's a glaring omission that they're talking about the vote adoption. And I understand where you're coming from, but they, you know, this is, I think the other part of it, which is the financial that you've opted this year up to 174 million, right? Not including Good Hope. So what does, you know, Good Hope need and what are those costs gonna be? Could be 9 or 10 million, it's gonna be something else. You know, we have to be able to see that whole picture.
Yeah, yep.
Well, there's the prior presentation. It's like 9.8 million. Costs.
Yeah, but I mean, then.
But that's not upgrade.
That option that has part of it, you know. That's my thought.
Yeah. I think respectfully trying to not slow down the conversation about the academic focus. We didn't want the board to feel like we had to weigh in on, are we gonna keep it? Are we not gonna keep it? Or are we gonna stick with these partners? Are we not? Are there other services we need to provide? That's a very big dialogue that's not rooted in the core educational piece. So the omission of that, I would say, really not by design to hide anything or pretend it's not. It's there. It's no.
I understand, and I know, and kind of commented one a little bit, I think that it's just a matter of just kind of like seeing that whole picture. When we do try to hone in on this stuff, when you try to bring it to the community, when you try to, you know, identify what our options are, whatever they are, I mean, you have to be able to speak to that, so I don't think we go forward, talk about 2 or 3 buildings, not talk about the whole, it all has.
Yeah.
One big discussion.
So I have 2 points. I think when you said you weren't directed to consider Good Hope, I think I really move forward with the assumption, I think I'm hearing other people did too, when we're talking about our district buildings. Presumptively, we were talking about all of our district buildings. And so existing space and the way it might be needed to be utilized probably needs to be under consideration. And we need information and direction from informed people to help us understand what should we be doing. I had the same thought. I was like, why would we be adding a fourth building to our district? And also, I had somebody say to me, it would not be a surprise to anybody who knows who this person may be. Is it possible they're putting that out there as a way to kind of move you toward other choices that they think are more feasible? Which
No.
I'm just saying,
Sure.
I think it's an obvious community reaction sometimes, right? Like, we're not even talking about Good Hope, and all of a sudden, here's this building growing on a space that's taking away some community resources, like the tennis courts that are popular spaces for our neighborhoods. The other thing I just want to bring into the conversation is within the flood and equity, we don't actually start at 4K. We start at early childhood, which you do discuss in other formats. But we need to make sure our spaces are honoring these little tiny bodies just as much. And I would just ask that we make sure we have that discussion.
Then we should look and reflect, and we really just, we still have EC in the program and everything, so just know that that's there. I would say from the Good Hope lens, then, you know, through our presentation and everything, and as we're looking this as a master plan, then as we know it today, then Good Hope, as you'll see it on the next slide, then it should be brought forward with the maintenance dollars. And if we're looking at it just as a district building, then it would just have the maintenance dollar added, because at this point, it would just continue to function as is. And we would suggest that the district put the maintenance dollars in it to keep it going. So that's how, sorry.
For two of these options, we have massive new community spaces potentially. Here at Parkway, or at Parkway. Or here.
Here. Yeah, I should have, I knew better, I should have advanced and went back and.
I think Nicole's computer was.
It's waiting for PRA.
Oh,
It takes a minute. I just went back.
All right, so I
Start
think
talking
we've
about-
vented our
Yeah.
space. Should we go
That's good.
into the detail?
Yeah,
and truly, guys, this is what we need to hear.
Yes.
And like I said, none of these options may be what we move forward. That's okay.
Wait, I missed the point on you said we should be putting money where?
no, okay, here, let me slide it. It takes a second. I struggle with sitting down and pointing at this thing.
He's saying that good.
It'll
is still
go
not
back.
be-
Yeah, I would,
We're still gonna set, right?
Right.
correct, if we're continuing on with that building, then yes, that would be a dollar amount that you would want to add to the overall cost of a master plan, and like Nick and Nicole were mentioning. Right, this is something that's done over many years. This isn't something that is like all of a sudden, you know, the survey comes back from the community and all our neighbors say, wow, this looks really good, let's do all of this. I don't even know if we can, I don't think it should be feasible. But this is something that will be done, you know, over a long period of time. So, right, we're looking at kind of ideal scenario and circumstances, and again, something that's implemented over a long period of time. So I like to stand up here because first I'm just gonna describe what we're looking at. So there's a little key in the corner, if anybody's seen that, but otherwise I can just uniquely say that this top line is basically, this is an existing statement. So if you're on your left, we have Parkway, it's got great configuration within that, so DC, through 3. Next slide. Glen Hills, and it's important, we wrote, right, with district office, but same great configuration, so 4A, and then we have Good Hope. So this is our error, we should have, as we move to the future, Good Hope should be shown with that darker gray color to show that we're incorporating maintenance within that. Otherwise, as we move to future state, a blue box, that would be an addition. If we're mostly doing light renovation, then we have a blue diagonal hatch. If it's green, then that's a heavy renovation. And if it's all green, then that's new construction. So in our existing grade configuration, you could think of this as, we're doing more, I guess, with fewer buildings, with the buildings that we have right now, right? We're just reinforcing what we have because
we've got good bones, and with the existing grade configuration, right? To make these buildings whole, I don't have to call it, say that, we're making them whole, right? We're addressing all the accessibility needs, we're doing all the special ed. And all the other, pieces that are needed within our buildings. So at Parkway, major renovation, and we look at a building addition. Again, that's to accommodate 4K properly. Here at, Glen Hills, it's heavy renovation where we need it, but there are plenty of areas where it's just light renovation as well. And then Good Hope, right? So let's all envision that as a darker Good Hope building. Patience. On the left, we have Parkway. On the right, we have Glen Hills. Glen Hills North is up. I apologize, but on Parkway, it just fit better with north to the right. Everybody knows the village or the town, city campus and everything. Police fire, city hall are all across the street there. On this graphic, it's important to note that the blue areas, those are our existing footprints as they exist today. The green are building additions. You'll notice them at Parkway. There's a lot of square footage here. We don't need any. There's a lot of square footage here. So, so at Parkway, you'll see some detail, but in the next slide that we have. But big things here are reconfiguring the site to accommodate bus traffic more appropriately, as well as parent pickup and drop off, as well as drop off of our littlest learners, right? So if it's a half day program, how are we getting those parents right up to the front door, or those buses right up to the front door as they're being transported? So that's Parkway, and then over here at Glen Hills, really we're reinforcing what we've got. Not a whole lot on the site here beyond the maintenance, right? But we're not specifically highlighting those. I did push the button already, so it's
Change them.
it changed down there, yeah. So I apologize, but again, right, another new graphic to look at. Here was that stop sign. So here, red because it costs more is a building addition. Yellow is a heavy renovation. Green is that light renovation that Nicole had mentioned. So over here on the end of the building, we have an addition to accommodate our littlest learners with EC, with appropriately sized kindergarten spaces, as well as accommodating a couple of our kindergarten classrooms. Where the kindergarten is right now, let's go into a little bit of detail on this one. We're right sizing rooms for first graders because we know that they don't meet the kindergarten needs right now, but they also don't necessarily meet the first graders needs. We have a lot of admin and student support spaces, all of our interventionists and assistants that's coming over from district office. So we need to increase the size of our administrative office and make sure that we're welcoming people through secure entrance. With the additional numbers of students and the size of our gym, we're proposing a larger gym at Parkway. We're also proposing music space and expanded commons. So that's, yeah, please.
On the gym space, some of that space already exists, right?
Correct.
Okay, so the whole red isn't the addition.
If we were to continue with it this way, because of the way the gem span works, we'd have to take down the gym to put new. We've been talking about some
I
other
see, I
issues,
see.
just tight with site space.
So it would be like an addition.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
If
a-
we went, and again, this is a test fit, a diagram, it gives Nicole something to price, so we're not shortchanging ourselves.
Got it.
So what Nick usually shares at this time is that we are looking to have our entire ball of clay here and how it's shaped or configured, like, right, if this addition is here versus here, that really, like, unless there's a major utility line or something that we know is not there, that doesn't change the front. This is, can we accommodate all of the individual elements, rooms, spaces that are needed for teaching and learning on the site? And where might they best appropriately fit on the building? And then we look at Glen Hills. So this is the floor we're on right now. Here's our upper floor and then our lower level. Again, yellow is our heavy renovation. So the walls won't be that hard to move, but it's still, we're moving walls. So that's a heavy renovation. And then the green is a light renovation. So you can see upstairs as we look at properly accommodating grade level communities for 6, 7, and 8. And then on the main floor for 4th and 5th, and then the support spaces and other areas that are needed for those. This is how that renovation and everything kind of begins to shake out. Any questions on Glen Hills?
I always have questions. Is there, anything in this review that would involve more visits?
Yes, that's it.
Lots more.
Yes.
Okay.
I
Good
didn't even cue that up, but everywhere you see a little squiggly line, oh, look at that,
Draw
that
it.
amazed me, like,
Illustrator.
everywhere, yeah, all
Because I'm
spaces.
seeing you have every actual classroom on an external wall.
Yeah.
And those little black lines are fixed.
Yep, absolutely.
So now we took all of that information, looked at the square footages, worked with our pre-con group. Got a bunch of the budgetary numbers that are consistent with other projects like this and got to these budget numbers. So we have a range between 37.1 and 40.9 million for Parkway. And for Glen Hills, it's 38.4 to 42.4. And then if we add our 9.8 of Good Hope, we would have a total of 85 to 93 million for this scenario. As part of that, we did do a bunch of detailed information associated with each of those spaces, breaking it down of what we actually had cost per square foot wise. We did then isolate that so you can see here's a little bit more breakdown with the additions. So Parkway, the additions, we have about 28,000 square feet, so we've got $23.3 million. Renovations, 11.2. And then we took that original capital maintenance that we talked about in the last few meetings that we had and went line by line and decided what was covered as part of these new breakouts that would not be a capital maintenance number anymore, and got the residual of what we would still need to pick up as part of that capital maintenance. So that's that 4.1 million. The ranges are for the buildings because we don't have specifics right now. The addition of renovation maintenance numbers are averages. So that was how we have that breakdown down. If you look at Glen Hills, the additions were 0 because we've got the square footages here. Renovations, 33.6 million and maintenance, 6.8 million. And then we took those same numbers again and looked at them a little bit differently of how you broke down the types of renovations you're doing, some safety security, major building systems. So safety security, we looked at doors, CCTV, security, cameras, fire sprinkler, fire alarm, PA and intercom. So anything that ties into those systems, we broke that out. We'd have like 77.4 to $8.4 million for that. Major building systems, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, 27.3 million to 30.2 million. Site work, any of that out exterior stuff, 12 to 13.3 million. Building shell, that facade, those larger windows here in the classrooms. We have 16.8 to 18.4 million. And then the classroom spaces, 11 to 12 million. And then we did have the community spaces here at Glen Hills, which included like the pool, the senior center, stuff like that. We broke that out as an isolation just because we thought you'd want to see the differences with the spends. We do have a little diagram here of what we were looking at as a conceptual schedule of about 23, 24 months worth of construction. Obviously that can shift a little depending how everything goes. But that is this breakout of concept 1A.
So it would take 2 years to do that.
And breaking some of this stuff out, knowing how we have the additions and moving people over. You don't have free reign of the entire space. If we did close the school down, we could obviously attack it faster, but I don't think that students would really like it. I don't think the parents would like that.
And
Well,
let me help with answering that a little bit more, because like you see basically like 2 years of construction, you still need time for design before that.
I'm thinking about student experience. We each have kids at that school who are surviving
Yeah.
the
That's
construction journey. It's brutal. Like my
Yep.
daughter was just saying, next week my class X is in the basement. I'm not sure I'm gonna remember, like,
Yeah.
For some reason, they did the football field first.
just incredible how they got that done.
It's like, why not do the classrooms during the summer and the sports fields during the.
They
Yeah,
don't.
you had a
I'm cannot answer that. But.
No,
You got a question, you know, I mean, this is, I mean, they know that it doesn't feel we're a priority because they have wanted to make sure the field's up and running. And I know there's a lot of consideration of those units, what they could do concurrently with, school. But you know, what I was just thinking about is, you make a good point about the student experience and
Mm.
high schoolers, you know, we're living in a tomb, you know, for all that time until finally kind of literally start to see the light. I mean, I don't know how middle schoolers and elementary schoolers, you know, two buildings theoretically at the same time. I don't know how they deal with that. You know, it's theoretically a lot, and I guess, you know, that kind of goes to the question I was wondering, which is, you know, we're talking about major building systems that to do with that, plumbing, electricity and stuff like that. I mean, and to compare it to Nick Lake, just a second, I mean, are we faced with similar issues? Is there any, I don't know, asbestos remediation, are there code issues, you know, does plumbing, electrical be upgraded? I mean, are we talking about doing everything in there?
Yeah, so everything that was in the capital improvement numbers we looked at this summer, that's all assumed in the cost that you see here. So yes, to answer your question, all of the above. HVAC system, electrical updates, code compliance updates. If we're renovating and there is asbestos, that has to be abated as part of that, so that's all been assumed. Yeah, when we break, I think just strategically, as you look at the by type breakout, I know it's a lot of detail and it's just kind of reshuffling the dollars you see kind of summarized. It is important because most districts, frankly, every district I've ever worked with, has had to create a phasing strategy to complete their master plan. None of them have been able to do it all at once, right? So what that really means is we have to prioritize. And in that prioritization, we have to start thinking about safety and security and education and infrastructure. So it is important for us to start to have a scale of magnitude of how we might isolate those buckets. It may be how we ask for feedback in the survey, right? It may be how we want to start to talk about some of these in our communication materials. And so just know we're starting to introduce some of that because I think it'll become a more important conversation.
Yeah, did you guys have a proposal that's less than an $85 million referendum?
So we looked at whole building solutions for a master plan. We didn't just drive toward $1.
Yeah, because it looks like the cheapest one you're proposing is $85 million.
Yeah, and just for clarification, no referendum yet, right? So no.
Well, we don't have, I mean, our general fund, we ended 2 years ago at 4 million. We're at 2.8 million now, and we're at 5,000. I'm just saying, like, our general fund is like.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have to pass a referendum.
We don't know that, not if you do nothing, right? Not if we say we're gonna bite this off in really small pieces for many, many, many years. That happens, right? And if that's the case, we just know, as Devin said earlier, we're doing that strategically, right?
Yeah.
But if in fact that is a next step, we want to be sure again that we understand how to break these apart, have plans for them. The goal was, I think, to this point, to find cheapest path, not to say that that isn't the next step, is how do we figure out what's the most affordable way to achieve our goals. Right now, we're working on deals.
Well, one of the things like we have to do is we have to make the buildings more accessible, but by providing like an $85 million option, I mean, is there an option that's not as expensive, but also, you know, leads to accessibility?
I think that's what he was talking about, breaking it down.
Well, no, I know, but I mean, these are the 3 proposals that it came with. So, I mean, you can talk about it, but this is what was brought.
Yeah, I think the $45 million we saw earlier, which is just your core infrastructure. You don't change any education, continue functioning as you are, and you update those bathrooms and make them compliant, and you paint the walls and replace the air. That is a cheaper path, but it doesn't solve for some of the academic goals and the grade configuration things. So again, the whole effort here is holistically, we're trying to be sure we don't lose sight of all the potential goals or needs within the district.
Questions on 1A?
Like a slow introduction of sticker shock.
Next level.
This is,
It's like learning.
this is the master plan, this is the biggest numbers.
And Nick mentioned, right, we're looking at things like across the whole gamut so that everybody is prepared with that information. Doesn't mean that one. You know, the most expensive ones picked just because, or the maintenance ones.
So moving on to option 1B, which is our fourth grade move over the Parkway. The diagram here looks very, very similar, other than you will notice that the 3 changed to a 4 on Parkway and the 4 changed to a 5 on Glen Hills. So moving on to the site plan, again, really similar, kind of from a site level. We're not seeing a lot change at Glen Hills. At Parkway, we're seeing an additional addition there. So really kind of focusing on moving over to the left side of the site with those additions. So looking at the Parkway floor plans, a lot of repeated, I think I went through a little more detail last time, so I'm not going to go through it again. So a lot of similar ideas with gym, office, commons. All of our core classrooms are early childhood wing, largely the same. We just have a 4th grade addition down at the bottom corner of the screen there that you're seeing attached to the 3rd grade wing. All of those additions having the classrooms needed, as well as some breakout spaces that are dedicated to get lockers out of the corridor, and obviously appropriate special education spaces as discussed. And then over at Glen Hills, again, we've got a sea of yellow and green. So a little bit on the smaller side here, but what you would see if we were zooming in or if you're looking at your screen is that it's starting to free up more space. So the previous plan, we had 3 grades on the top floor, the upper floor, which works. There's a lot of space up there, but it's a little bit of a shuffle to get that exterior wall, to get windows, like we talked about earlier. This is definitely a looser fit. Like there's a good amount of space. The upper floor has 2 grades in this scenario. Just as a test fit, we're showing some way of connecting upper and main floor with a larger stair, some kind of creative idea there just to kind of, again, master plan. Main floor would house 2 grades, so that would kind of give that split of 5th, 6th, and 7th, 8th, and have specialty spaces for both and a little bit of a home for both. That doesn't involve going through anyone else's classroom. And expansion to the office, commons, as we saw previously, really just given a refresh, a little more daylight. And then down below, we're starting to actually push into some of the storage space to kind of, again, look at moving some community spaces down there and get the most daylighting available. So this scheme moves the district office down to the basement, if you will, but with windows. To free up space for the middle school office on the main floor. Gym and pool still getting kind of that refresh. We're showing a space for daycare and wraparound in the current boys' locker room that would be completely gutted. It would not look or smell like a boys' locker room anymore. Moving the locker rooms around and then pushing a little bit into that storage space for new facility space, where the old facility space would be redone and would become kind of that fab lab and engineering space.
So looking at the breakdown of how all the different spaces are spread up here, we have the overall costs associated with these scenarios. At Parkway, we would have the 46.3 million. Glen Hills, 39.3 to 43.5, and then Good Hope would be that maintenance of the 9.8 million again, for a total of 91 to 99.6 million. If we take that breakout again, we look at our additions at Parkway, we're looking at about 38,000 square feet, so we've got $27.7 million. The renovations, 12.2, and then again, that delta of taking everything we had previously, 4 million on maintenance. Glen Hills, we would have 0 for the addition, 34.6 for the maintenance, and for renovation, and 6.8 million for the maintenance. And once we look at that the other way, where we're able to break it down by that safety, security, major building systems is 7.8 to 8.8 million for safety, security. The major building systems, the MEPs, 29 to 32 million. Site work, 12.2 to 13.4 million. Building shell, 18.1 to 20 million. Classroom support spaces, 12.8 to 14.1 million, and then the community spaces, we have 1.3 to 1.5. We have a few of those additional spaces that Nicole was talking about. So overall, on this one, like I said, it's 91 to 99.6 million for this scenario. Any questions?
Okay.
Yeah, I am curious about maintenance costs, because I was expecting to see bigger drop in the maintenance line item from our original, if you only did maintenance numbers. It looks like we save about half those maintenance costs. So I'm wondering how that, why those costs remain so high? Is it because we're maintaining existing systems, just?
So the maintenance for Glen Hills was 12.5. Yeah.
And now it's 6.8. In my mind, I had this sort of fantasy where if you did a major renovation, those maintenance costs would come down much more, because at least for some period of time, you've got new systems, right? And you're not having to do huge.
When we do the light renovation, you get less of that. That's actually overall done. We did go room by room, line by line, and assigned it for capital or renovation, so we didn't double dip on anything. And we did look at absolutely everything, and these were ones that were not picked up as part of the renovation. A majority of it was the exterior stuff, because we're not talking about any of the masonry and some of that site work, the asphalt replacement. So that just went straight to the capital. Those were the big ones that I remembered seeing.
But they wouldn't necessarily, the cost wouldn't go away, they'd just be reallocated, right? So you'd still pay for it, just be allocated in the heavy renovation. that are
Correct.
Not.
You're seeing it in a different bucket.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense, Carol?
Yeah, it does. As soon as you said exterior, I get it. And then I just noted, I know that it makes our music staff sad that they have no windows. And I see in this renovation, there's still no windows, right? For band and chorus. It struck me. It's hard being in the basement.
And that's one of the struggles we had with this building, is there's so much square footage, but
Yeah.
so much of it just doesn't have an opportunity to access daylight.
The floor plate is very deep. That makes it increasingly challenging unless you literally just put a hole in the middle of the building and to bring light in.
Like with the skyline.
Yeah.
How much would that?
Or dig light tunnels.
Less than the
Like,
maintenance.
Yeah, okay. Karen, do you have questions? Thoughts?
Well, so a lot of these numbers are, I mean, they're projected based on the plan as it stands right now. And so if there were changes made, so like the beautiful sweeping staircase, that could be really I mean, not that I don't want a beautiful architecturally
It's a
stunning
world of
staircase.
idealism.
Right. And so there's other design pieces that probably have aesthetics value added or other things that are value added, but perhaps could be eliminated without impacting the quality of learning for our students. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay.
It is. I would caution though that, while there is certainly value to that, and not insignificant value to that, when we need to move, say, in tens of millions of dollars, the needle, we're talking about total scope, not necessarily changing, hesitate to use the word quality, but it's not changing things like staircases.
Sure.
And
Let's not do a part building.
Right.
right, and I think, Mike has talked about this a couple of times now. And I'm sure you all get it. We're shell shocked too, when we see these numbers, and this is something that we experienced. This is not at all unique to this project or this study. Everywhere we're going, construction has just gotten expensive. So as Mike has talked about phasing, we keep talking about master plan. I would echo what he said, that it's not common at all for a district to take an entire master plan, or a community, say entire master plan, and say, yeah, let's do $80 million at one time. What we have to do is find an appropriate path, like this is where we want to go, and then we start to break down these big numbers into what are the steps that we go, and what are, again, echo Mike, what are those priorities? We know accessibility is a huge priority. There are districts that look as a first step at just tackling things like that. Like, we need to tackle our accessibility, whatever that means, and our top level maintenance. And that's how far our community is ready to go now, but we do it in a context of a larger roadmap.
It's so hard because when you do it that way, inevitably it's gonna cost more.
Yes.
In the long run. And so it's just so hard, but
It is.
hard to figure out how to do it right, unless you're Richard Wisdom.
And you
If
bring it,
it's a priority, then why are we talking about this right now? Why don't we talk about, like, we need to do maintenance in these areas because this is a massive priority? Why are we talking about 80 million to $100 million?
because you need to know where you want to go long term. Ben, if this conversation ends in a place, and it's totally fine, we've had districts that communities that land here. That say, yeah, you know what, based on whatever, our curriculum, our strategic plan, our fiscal reality, our enrollment, whatever the combination of variables is. They say, you know what, we're okay with our buildings the way we are. And what we really need to do is start to tackle thoughtfully that maintenance list. That is the master plan. The maintenance list is the master plan.
I don't think anyone's saying that. I think people are saying, hey, like our bathrooms, the doors need to be widened. We're saying that classroom doors, so no one's saying that nothing needs to be done. So I don't know where you're getting that. But my question is, you know, the option you're presenting is, you know, the lowest option is 85 million, but we do have priorities. So why isn't that also being presented where it's like, hey, here are the priorities being fixed. This is gonna take a summer. And okay, so now we have bigger goals, but you know, right now, budgets aren't looking good around Wisconsin. Maybe we should sit and wait a little bit.
And that may be where we go.
But we're talking about 85 million.
We're gonna
dollars.
discover the priorities together.
Okay,
Well, so, and I just want to echo what Ben's saying, because, you know, first of all, and Carla also, you made a great point, right? That, you know, and if you do think piecemeal perhaps is gonna be more expensive in the long run. I mean, I've had this conversation with you guys, do you do it in stages?
Yeah.
One thing at a time, you know, and inevitably, you know, yeah, I mean, if you could do everything at once, there's a lot of, you know, difficulty, right? There's when do you start and where the students are gonna be and how do you time everything? Fortunately, there's no athletic field to deal with here. And those kinds of.
There's
work.
no AstroTurf in this plan.
But, oh, now you did say that a lot.
I did.
But the concern that I have is, I mean, I don't know how you don't do this based on need first. And the trouble that I have so far is I'm trying to understand what our needs are. I'm trying to understand what a vision is for what we want, you know, the district to look like. That's, so, you know, I agree, you know, for example, obviously everyone wants things to be brought up to the 21st century with the ADA, right? And frankly, there's a lot of stuff under the hood that is not sexy, so to speak, that, you know, somewhere something's gotta be addressed with that. But what are we doing and why are we doing it? We need to understand what our, you know, goal here is. I mean, are we trying to just, you know, dust it off and make it pretty and do, I don't know. And I think one of the things I'm trying to grapple with is, what is our vision? What do we want the school to look like? I mean, I want them to be modern. I want things to be updated. I want us to have, you know, buildings that aren't, you know, falling apart and better use of space, right? And so these are things that are important, but then I look at, you know, the two other referendums in the community and, you know, one district built a brand new building for 57 million. And by the way, I don't understand, you know, I mean, going to the next option, I mean, why it's more expensive to build a third building. We can consider that, but aside from the whole thing, but the big thing for me is I don't understand what it is we're trying to accomplish or how we have those priorities, you know. And for me, I want to see a ranking of those. When Nicolay, and I was not on the board when Nicolay passed it, Nicolay was very, very adept at breaking things down. And I know that their board went through a lot of evaluation. They came up with, you know, and I understand it's also part of what needs to, you know, happen too. But they came up with priorities. And they also came up with expenditures and they asked about what number of people felt comfortable, you know, and I don't like that. Because I want to talk about priorities first, but numbers are, you know, an issue. I'd rather ask what are our priorities and what do we want to spend on those priorities, not what do we want to spend and what priorities can we fit to that number. And I don't know if you're saying the same thing, but I want to have a clear idea of what we are trying to accomplish. And that's the thing that I'm struggling with. The dollars are an issue, but you know, the dollars should follow the purpose, right? Form follows function. So that's where I'm coming from.
So I would say, I went to the community listening session, so I think that's where some of this stuff is implicitly coming, like the second option where fourth grade is moved back to Parkway
Correct.
is clearly a community priority. That is a universal truth that we hear from families all over. So for instance, we may not have talked about that as a board particularly, but it's pretty clear to me that in our community, there's a fourth grade at least. I mean, it's just, it's a refrain. It's something we've heard over many, many years. This is not new. So that shouldn't be a surprise.
No.
But I guess, you know, yeah, maybe it needs to be articulated, like, these are the academic goals, these are the wishes that the community and staff have expressed, which we don't necessarily have access to. That's why we have them.
Yeah.
The surveys and community listening session.
And so that's part of what we're going to do next, you know, that makes sense to me, but I just want to make sure that we're doing it based on our need, not based on, you know, burning a hole in our pocket with, you know, theoretical, you know, public funds.
It's
And the way they used to deal with that with Parkway having 1 through 4 was they had kindergarten and Good Hope.
So Andy, I would say that everything you're saying is absolutely right, but we wouldn't be able to have that conversation if we weren't having this conversation. If we didn't have all the conversations about maintenance and where we are, we didn't have conversations about instructionally, what is the ideal setting that we think kids can learn in? We didn't talk about accessibility. When we came up with these options and we brainstormed about 8, we didn't have price tags on them. We were just talking about what we thought was best for students. Now maybe we look at it and go, that's not possible, but we had to have the conversation, we had to bring it all, we had to share it all, so that we can prioritize and do exactly what you're saying.
And maybe it's just some follow-up communication, like what specific priorities were in mind. There's clearly a lot of thinking behind this that maybe just didn't end up right here in a list where you could say, you know, these are the 5 priorities that this team called from community listening sessions, teacher listening sessions, you know, la, 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 la.
And I think you're saying prioritize it based on your feedback. So now that you hear it all, the board might say accessibility, windows. You know what I mean? Like there could be a clear direction after hearing all this information.
You know, I want to say one thing that also just been on my mind, and that is that, yeah, I've been thinking about the dollars, how the dollars impact the community. With inflation and with Nicolay referendum, I know that people are being hit with the forward bill, Fox Point, Bayside, you know, under property taxes, and, you know, look, and you build something, you improve it to keep people coming in and to raise property taxes, which is important, but with property tax increase, value, all increase also comes the tax increase. And, you know, while we are the largest district in the feeders, right, you know, we're much bigger than Fox Point, you know, but we have a much greater socioeconomic diversity. And so, you know, using like Nicolay's figures, maybe it was, you know, I don't know, $1.11 for every $1,000 out of the referendum, right? I mean, that $1.11 on every $1,000 worth of value in a house is gonna hurt Nicolay, Glendale resident, impact them, I say, more than, you know, people in Fox Point Bayside possibly, or in River Hill, definitely, right? We only have a thin strip, you know, that's part of, you know, our district, River Hill. And so, you know, I think that there has to be some balance here, but I don't know what the community, you know, can, and that's not a reason not to do something, not a reason not to explore it. And certainly that's the reason why we have to involve the community in these discussions, right? Because you can't just assume, but it's a big concern that I have, that I don't know how much this community at this point is going to be able, you know, to carry.
Yeah, Nicolay's referendum was what, 77 million?
It was, I think, 77 million, and then to build a new middle school in Fox Point Bayside, I think it was 57 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. So.
And we will, as of right now, the trajectory would be to have a community survey this spring, and if that's still on track, part of the thought process would be to have Harry come in and talk about the types of questions we might ask on that survey. Not just in response to this, but to your point, Andy, like what are tax impacts and would folks be willing to consider something? And if so, to what level? or not at all. And that there are ways that I think we can gauge some of that supportability, if you would, for something, if anything, via the survey as well. And I think the whole goal in all this is to keep informing the board, keep bringing forth more and more information so that you can make an informed decision as we get down the line.
That was a point though that I've spoken to in the past and Andy just spoke to, which is one of the things that happened with Nicolay is they basically said, well, how much money are you willing to spend? And there was no information behind it to help people understand what that meant, right? So like, unless you had really been paying attention, you didn't have the information that let you understand. And there have been some people who are like, well, I don't understand why we're not doing this if we're doing this, or why we're, you know, because they weren't paying attention. And you know, the general public, God bless them, has other stuff to do, right? And so they're living their lives and doing whatever, but I do want to be very careful, any questions that we ask, that we're asking them in a way that doesn't, that is getting true information, as opposed to like, well, I'm only willing to give you an extra 60 cents on the dollar, so good luck, right? Because if that doesn't allow us to achieve the bare minimum of what we need, it doesn't help us ultimately.
Yeah, and there are multiple ways to survey. You can, this doesn't sound like this is what Nicolay did, but you can say, this is our vision, here's the solution, here is the impact, would you support it, yes or no? Right, all in, clean cut. The other way to approach it is we have needs upwards of $80+ million in a master plan. We can't get it all done, but we want to get as much as you're willing to support and would prioritize with us to get done. What would that be? And then help us prioritize those projects. And then you build a solution that the community is most supportive of. That sounds more closely aligned, right? With maybe what Nicolay.
Yeah, I mean, look, and by the way, I mean, certainly not trash Nicolay, but, you know, Nicolay had, priorities. You know, they definitely had areas that they wanted to spend. They definitely, you know, kind of led, I think, with question, yeah, and de-scope based on what people were comfortable with. But they had a lot of that fleshed out, you know, before they went to the community. And, you know, they also, look, high school, some of the priorities were kind of easier to kind of illuminate, but they broke it down.
But
Right.
didn't you do a preliminary survey? I remember getting a survey like,
COVID got in the way of,
but there was like a survey, it was like a list, which of these things are your top priorities? So they went to the community to identify priorities with like a.
Yeah, I
list
think
of,
we should,
like,
and maybe it's
sports,
balanced.
there was
Maybe-
two,
you know, whatever it
There's
was,
two
it was
surveys.
like
Yeah.
a click survey, which would be a good way to. I mean, I guess, I remember getting that survey and my husband and I were like snickering it, we're like. Wow, what a weird survey, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
that's inevitably what you're gonna end up with, but that would be one way.
You actually,
I did. On the phone.
And all, really healthy conversation, all of this is a step ahead of, right? Our goal is to have a vision, right? Have a master plan in which we can develop phasing for, right? And survey around and get feedback,
Mhm.
you know, amidst. And so that's really what we hope this conversation and the continued dialogue is around, continuing to refine these options and, you know, as we close out these next couple slides, continuing that dialogue.
yeah, and I would just echo that. What we're showing you here is based on our step one and our step two. It's based on the needs that we saw from the overall facility and just the nuts and bolts, the infrastructure. And then also the pieces that are missing here, right? So when we did that walk around, it's the squishy window. Within our classroom spaces, it's the acoustical separation or just the kids walking through the rooms that then we actually heard a solution for at the STEAM fair that we were here. A kid brought up, hey, couldn't you do this? And like, wow, I don't think you've thought about that for more than 5 minutes.
And had a good
So like we are addressing the needs as you see more program being removed or grade level going to Parkway or more grade levels going to some another school building, then you're seeing additional space being opened up for other uses here at this building, and whether that's a priority or not, it's something we'll come to. But I think, you know, just want to get a little background of where we are again and why we're proposing what we're proposing.
I guess, Andy, I think I'm gonna be the dead person too, but you know, when you talk about priorities, it's our job to set priorities. We can't just ask our consultants to set them and bring them to us. So it begs the question of whether we need to do some work as a board to identify our own priorities as board members and communicate them to Allison and this team. And then we mesh that up with what the community is saying. But Have you articulated your priorities first? Well, I mean, that's what I'm sitting here thinking. I talk here, but I haven't really articulated in my mind, like, my handful of top priorities for our district, and that's probably work I need to do. So this is helpful.
Okay. Option 2A, we've talked a fair amount about this one already. The priority explored in this one was really grade level configuration, right? So that's a big variable that we have been talking about, and in my experience, and our team can, I think, can echo this. This is a different grade level configuration that we're starting with here. I've never worked on a 4th grade through 8th building. So the conversation that arrived at this point was, again, we were not talking about budgets when we had these conversations. What grade level configuration might be worth looking at here in this community? That's how we arrived at a 3-building solution. This one starts with a brand new building, a 3rd building. So yeah, we've already talked about, could we use Good Hope? That could be an option. We could look at doing something at Good Hope if we wanted 3 buildings. Okay, so that could be another variation. So in this scheme, what this does, Parkway Elementary becomes our EC through 2, so it's our primary center. Glen Hills goes to a more traditional middle school, 6 through 8 are in this building, and like we've talked about before, a challenge here is this building is just big. It's just a big building, so we pull another grade out, we just have more space that we have to work with here. And as we've talked about prior, we build a 3 through 5 intermediate school here on this site. So that's pulling all of our elementary school kids out of this building, looking really at where we want our kids' grade level organization. So very similar to what we've seen previously, Parkway gets expanded to accommodate our early learning classrooms. That's a challenge at any building that we go to. We don't have enough true kindergarten, EC, 4K, 5K classrooms. Over here at Glen Hills, you'll see a concept. This is truly a lump of clay. This is my favorite analogy of where a building might go on the site. And if we wanted to explore a 3-building organization with a building on the site, hypothetically, you could fit the building. It's a proof of concept. You could actually fit the building here on the site. There again, this is essentially the same floor plan that we had seen previously with our early learning wing being added onto the building, gymnasium being replaced. So we talked about this one. Is there anything different in this plan?
No.
All the 5K stays on board, but it's minor.
There's gotta be changes because the grades out.
Smaller.
Yeah.
addition.
Yeah, so it's probably.
Yeah.
The additions
More-
have to.
More renovation.
Yep, and then Glen Hills, we have even more space, of course, to consider what we might want to do with it from a community standpoint or otherwise.
This does get banned and the music classrooms windows. They're
Oh, yeah,
moved to the
yeah.
main level.
We do have that benefit.
Yeah, because we don't have the 5th grade level there, so our specials take our 4th pod in this scenario and move to the main level.
And the basement becomes all
It's a basement, yeah, besides gym, pool, and engineering is all community functions. So just to show, again, proof of concept, we're showing district office, community fitness, senior center, community room, and daycare.
Right, so again, before we talk about the numbers, this was primarily an exploration in grade level configuration. And is there something here that is worth exploring in terms of going back to a 3-building district?
And Nick, just to echo that again, 5th grade, the whole goal would be that we're not replicating special environments. We're not recreating any of the tech ed environments or the band environments at the new building. They would simply walk across the site to the enhanced versions in this building. So they still can academically access that. So that's, I think, the positive side educationally to why this was the option, or why the new construction piece was proposed as the option. A lot of thought, I think, Karen, not a sacrificial lamb, right? So just say that out loud, right? Not,
Yeah.
be, I think, worth the dialogue, even if it's not worth carrying forward, worth at least exploring and test fitting. If nothing else, could another building fit on this site?
Right.
Whether it's this or something else, that looks like it could, right? Long term, something could happen there, even if it's not today. So a lot of benefits, I think, in this effort so far.
I'm just curious, when we talk about a building that's dedicated to early childhood to several years ago, coincidentally, conversation with Good Hope School, one thing that we talked about was using Good Hope for early childhood to, maybe up to third grade, whatever it was, and doing some kind of three building configuration, but at the time, there was discussion about whether or not, you know, K3 would ever get funded, whether or not K4 for a full day would ever get funded and so forth. So I just want to make sure we're talking like EC to 2. Are we talking about the capacity to do, you know, early childhood, K3, K4, you know, all day, K5, 1 and 2? Or is, you know, I just want to know
Yes,
what's in the item.
yes, an all day 4K in the master plan. So yes, to everything you said, yes, to each of those levels, and assumes that we need to create the capacity for an all day 4K.
What about like K3 though?
So you're talking about regular ed K3, not special ed.
Just one EC
Yeah.
classroom space would be provided
Well, so I mean.
in
that was-
our options.
Center?
Just one EC space to continue what you have today
Yeah.
would be in our options.
All day K.
All day K4, yeah, so we have there's
I mean,
4 classrooms and
I
then
guess
5 of the others.
The next thing in my mind is, whatever option that we settle on, I mean, I also want to make sure, and this one, another reason why I always, in my mind, want to make sure that we have, you know, an option with Good Hope is we need space to explore, you know, to have, you know, that feels great. I want to be able, you know, to do that. I don't want to max something out, max out the space, you know, and then have to go back and like mentioned, but go back and, you know, renovate it.
Do it again.
You know, again, you know, if TV come up, you know, like to kind of have that, you know, space to grow.
That actually happened in Lake Mills. They did a referendum about 10 years ago, built a whole new school. And then 10 years later, they needed a new space. So they actually did this thing of building a new school and they still ran out of space. Yeah. So that also happens when you do action as well.
Birth rates are down. We're not gonna see a lot of growth.
Different amount of developable land out there too, so.
Yes, yeah. Okay.
So if we are planning on having more kids in the school, that should be a calculated plan. Because again, even if you build a new school, which is what you're saying, you can still run out of space if you don't foresee,
Absolutely.
you know, an influx of students.
Anyone in our audience have any questions?
Leave just a couple final slides.
Yeah, so going
was like
to,
Mills, right?
bless you.
Do you guys know about that? That was like Mills.
So we didn't work on it, but yes, I have heard that, but I do know that they had proposed a master plan that included that second school that they needed and as a part of that whole thing. So, and it involves,
Just wanted to fact check myself.
yeah.
So sometimes it's about choices.
Yeah, so I would share, you know, prioritization. So, right, so 4K is not funded right now, but unless we provided an option for a master plan solution for where it might go, we might accidentally put a gym right there, and then all of a sudden now you're gonna have parents coming to the back of the building because that might be the only place you can put 4K, and that's a completely hypothetical, so. But good to have the idea.
So looking at this scenario, the overall dollar figures, 30 to 33 million for Parkway, 36 to 40 at Glen Hills, and then the new addition, 40 to 44 million. As you look at it, the numbers and break them down a little bit more, on the next slide, we can see what additions are. We have a little bit less of an addition at Parkway because we don't have as many people going over there, so 17.6. Renovation is 10 million and maintenance is the 4.1. Glen Hills, we have 0 for addition, 31.6 for the renovation, and the maintenance is 6.8. And then obviously the new intermediate school is all new construction. If we take all of this and break it down into the safety security, on the next slide, you can see our numbers, about 10 million for safety security. MEP systems, just shy of 40 million, site work, 14. Building shell, 28 to 31, classroom support spaces, 15 to 17 million, and community spaces, 1.9 to 2.1 million. Obviously, this one's a little bit higher than the other ones because we've got a lot of more of that space down in the lower level of Glen Hills. And if we add the additional 9.8 for Good Hope, that gets to 116.7 to 127.9. And then I believe when we just look at all of the solutions on the next page, we kind of get to that summary of all of the different things that we had. We have the capital maintenance for the two buildings, which is 35.6 million. If you add Good Hope, it ends up being 45.5. And then you have your three different scenarios with each of the two buildings of where the costs are going across to see what the differences are there. And then is a just gut check if we were to do both of these kind of scenarios as brand new buildings, Parkway with that 4K to fourth grade. And Glen Hill Middle School, we've got 158 to 174 million. Or if we kept the current configuration with fourth grade still at Glen Hills, we have a little bit less, 154 to 169 million. The big difference between those two, I believe, is a daycare wraparound scenario.
So this is if we.
If you just brand new building for everything. So it was more of that gut check of, okay, here's what you're doing, is doing something meaningful to an existing building versus what would happen if you scrapped it and started all fresh. It wasn't.
Part of the reason I asked for that is because we had that guy say, what's the difference between a new fund
Right.
and a reno? So just
It's
to
good.
see that.
It's good. It's
Yeah.
good data.
Yeah.
I would be interested, I know it wasn't part of the direction that was discussed. I would be interested in an analysis that did include space at Good Hope, I think. I don't know what other people, it's an existing building. I understand that there's a benefit to isolating the two buildings. And maybe I'm the only one, but I guess I feel like with Parkway, we do want to make sure we have room to grow in case we do have to make choices or. You know, making, I think two buildings from this information makes a lot of sense to me. But if we needed to have three buildings for some reason, I would really hesitate to build a new one, I guess, even though I understand the theory that went behind it.
I'd always sort of loosely envisioned. Once I knew Good Hope was there, because I don't think I did until a couple of years ago. Like K3 through K5, like early education at Good Hope, and then
Yeah.
one
Used to be a
through
K4.
four.
Yeah, it used to
One
be.
through four at Parkway, then with the three buildings you have, you would be able to allocate, push people over to Good Hope, but then we did the walkthrough.
Right.
And I'm understanding that that would be a good thing for renovation. To make that even. AC ready. But I don't know, it would be interesting to explore.
Well, and to Andy's point, the conversation around. There's more. So if we do the two building, if we were to move forward with the two building option. If the younger grades were to need expansion, so if there was all of a sudden a discussion around Head Start or P3 or having a community K3 where our early childhood was an integrated program, which would you know, like that space doesn't exist in those designs because it wasn't asked for, right? And so then the space is already finite, right? The way it's been designed, there's not growth opportunity. It's,
Correct.
although of course Glen Hills is still here.
Well,
That's true.
which may be how fourth grade got here in the first place.
That's exactly how fourth grade got here.
Well, fourth grade got here, 6 years ago now.
One.
Before my time.
Lily started, so my 21-year-old started K4 at Parkway. And I believe fourth grade had either had moved the year before or moved that year or the year.
Year, at least 6 years ago, right? There's Jeff Black, I think he just started.
She would have been 5, she would have been 4, so it would have been like 5 or 6
I'm gonna take this opportunity,
to shift it back.
35 minutes beyond.
Yeah.
The time
It's
to
been-
bring us back to our next steps in our facility planning process.
Oh, We're back to our family. I realized we had another slide to go, sorry.
Maybe
just
Mike
making
can
eye
cover
contact
most
with
of this if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of covered this back at the beginning, right? But this was very important feedback, so I think we've heard at least one option that we want to take a look at. What could we do with the Good Hope site? So we will continue to refine these options, and as Mike has said, and I think we've all said a few times, this is all getting us prepped for that survey ultimately, so. This is really just another piece of feedback. I think we heard a lot of good information. It's a lot to process. It was a lot for us to process getting to this point. And we have a fair amount of work yet to do. So I think that's about it for us this evening. We've got
You're so.
Because we know you hold your questions.
Great.
Oh, now you want,
We're not just gonna end on black.
but watch what I can do. Mike, Nicole, Devin, Nicole, Nick.
nice.
Oh, I should try to figure it.
Helps that three of us are some version of Nick. Oh, yeah.
Not a question, but to go back to what you said at one time, we did integrate with the early childhood program that in our shore area. Yep. So, they integrated into our classrooms, which was a really. I worked there. So, yep, just to share that with you. Yep.
I just have one other curiosity question. The Glen Hills renovate or the two or the second plan. There's no expansion needed for Glen Hills itself, but like, I guess, what was the switch instead of doing an addition to Glen Hills versus a whole second building? Like
The grade level.
Oh.
Figure it out.
Like adding on to.
It was
Why not just-
having Glen Hills just be 6th grade.
Well, and right, but I mean, could we just add an addition to Glen Hills to then accommodate like a different space? As opposed to it being a completely entirely
Or
different
just
building and taking out those tennis courts?
Yeah.
So I look at like some areas where.
I think we looked at positioning it a little bit farther away from the building to preserve the pickup drop off and also the play areas for the middle school students. But if we were posed with that challenge, I'm sure that, you know, we could come up with a solution that either touched in a large way, but still had a separate school building, or touched in a very light way, so that people were traversing between the two buildings, either.
And that was my question too,
yeah.
being a specialist teacher, I'm like, are we gonna?
That's
The 2 minutes, like, I don't know, I mean,
The kids were coming to you.
Yeah, no, either way, but I mean,
Yeah.
look at it like weather, I mean, we're in
Right.
Wisconsin, but I was just
Yeah.
curious. If that, like, what were some of the facets
Mhm.
in that decision?
Yeah, I think it kind of becomes the school within a school concept, right? So we're really creating two separate schools under one roof. Are there efficiencies? How does that differ from building it as a separate building altogether, right? And so you can kind of look at it either way. Psychologically, I think what is the impact of a 4th grader and 8th grader sharing a building? What's the impact of a 3rd grader and 8th grade sharing a building? Furthers dialogue, right? There's lots of opinions and emotions around that. So, 2 schools under one roof, no matter how we talk about it, it's still one building, and that's still a part of the dialogue. So I think we could further look at that as a desire. Yeah, good question.
Please know how much we do appreciate your.
Absolutely, thank you for the invitation with us,
We asked why we need this conversation.
and thanks for saying like.
Oh, yeah.
They know
Thank
all
you.
agenda times are estimated.
All right, stay around for the good stuff now.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to.
Yeah,
Happy New Year. Okay, WASB resolutions. Item 5A.
So, what I did was I attached the resolutions that Ben will have an opportunity to vote on during the delegates ceremony, during the conference, and I also attached I'm trying to figure out what I called it, WASB proposed resolutions, I should have named that better. That is just, my opinion on the resolutions. Really, it says WASB proposed, it's the third
Oh,
one
I
on the
see.
list. And basically, it's just, I didn't see anything that we wouldn't approve. There were a couple of notes that I made about funding. Like, yeah, that's a great idea, as long as there's state funding attached to it. I'm sure that I won't be, I'm sure that'll be a conversation. during the event. Basically, I thought everybody could take these, if anybody had any feedback or thoughts, they could just share them with you, Ben, and that way when you go on that date, you would have some feedback from the rest of the board.
Yeah.
What it really is you guys, there's a representative from each district, they vote a certain way on each resolution. WASB then takes that vote and says, oh, 70% of districts agree with this, so WASB now says we support this. But there's really no
So when I'm voting,
action.
like, do I vote the way they want me to?
No,
No,
I don't think the way, who?
so like us, the school board, so
Like, how do I know how, like, do I vote?
he's gonna keep representing Glendale Hills.
So I vote the way they want.
So I would say if there's one that like 3 board members disagree with, then yeah, that would probably influence the. vote.
Cause I,
Well, there's only discussion,
Yeah.
usually, you know, we had an action item, just give, you know, if it was you or if it's Tamika, you know, the discretion, you know, to vote as, you know, you feel, you know, within the confines of, you know, whatever.
Sorry, I didn't remember that from last.
But I don't know that, you know, I agree with Alton, I don't know if you necessarily need formal authority, because
He's been appointed as our representative already.
Because he's been appointed as a representative already, exactly, and because this is an official board action.
Right.
Right, so, I mean, you're going to do what you need to do based on the information that's given, so I don't think you have to.
yeah, oh, okay. Well, I don't know.
It's a question of collegiality and.
Yeah, I just, I,
The law.
Just do what we
Ben, I
want
just
and
wanted
it
to
won't be any
provide you
problem.
the
Oh, I
opportunity
didn't-
to get
I know,
feedback from
I didn't
people,
know,
so
I
you didn't
didn't
just
know.
go in
That's why I
like.
didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
I
well,
think as our delegated representative, Ben
I agree.
can vote as he chooses, but we could also give you our feedback.
Yeah.
And invite you to consider our.
This isn't, you know, binding.
Thank you, guys.
know, This isn't the force
Have a
of
good
law, so anything that happens is a resolution that
Right.
was be formally adopted,
Right.
you know, for lobbying purposes, right?
Right.
So there's no,
do you guys know, so for 24/11 licensure, are they gonna just say vote on licensure? Because
you
I
see
have,
there's a list.
What they have is they have WASB statements of what they want to have.
got it, because
Right, it's
like,
not,
if you look at 4.8 evaluations, it's way at the bottom. Oh, B, part B.
I see it.
Yeah, where it says the WASB supports legislation that would allow districts to develop a teacher evaluation instrument that would include all test assessment results as part of the criteria for evaluating teachers. I understand why that might be an attractive thing to do, and I sort of agree with it, and I think that my test results, like from my students, should have, like when I was teaching, you know, I was like, okay, yeah, they.
Can you have it both ways?
No, I'm saying, I think that it should, you know, like, there, if
Yeah.
we know if something bad is happening in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
However, sometimes districts provide bad curriculum, like inquiry-based
Right, is it the
curriculum,
system or is it?
and, you know, then it's like, okay, well, even if you're, I mean, again, you know, would you rather have a great teacher and bad curriculum, or bad teacher and great curriculum? You'd rather have a great teacher with a bad curriculum, right? However, regardless, the inquiry-based program is going to bring your test results down, right? So I don't know what you guys think about that, and I don't even know if I can even get that nuanced with the vote.
well,
Because I might say, well, no, but not B, you know,
what you can do is you can stand an advocate.
yeah,
So you'd have the, if that's important to you
Yeah.
as our delegate to say that at the convention, you'll have the opportunity. So like I'm linked into a lot of disability advocacy,
Yeah.
right? So I'm gonna share with you my thoughts
Okay.
about the seclusion and restraint and there's one more. That's an inclusion proposed language, but you know, there are several disability advocates who sit on school boards who are gonna get up and speak.
okay,
They do not, the language is not where they'd like it to be, so we don't know what'll happen as the delegation votes, but at least I'll have a chance. to see.
got it,
And there's oh, I'm sorry,
okay,
there's a piece that says debate on the floor. And it says like there's numbered microphones and you can go up and you can talk. And
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's fine, I just didn't know how nuanced voting was gonna get with, like, can you do A and C, strike down B, you know?
I don't know, but you could probably
That-
talk to a
Hypothetically
piece
could.
of it.
Oh, I
You'd
would-
probably have to do it like an Iowa caucus. You'd have to run around
Yeah.
and talk to a bunch of people
Right, yeah.
and try to get a.
No,
some
that, well,
sort of-
maybe it is like that. I
Yeah.
literally have no idea. So,
Filibuster.
I mean, do either of you know, or,
No,
idea.
but I think what I'm describing does happen,
okay,
just based on like hearsay and talking with people who are advocates who've gone in there. You get up, you can advocate.
so
you
it's
can
like a
talk with
slow
people.
process.
You can talk with people beforehand if it's
Yeah.
really important to you. You could walk around with your alternative proposed
And
language.
maybe this is exactly what the discussion is previously, right? They've got the whole discussion about, maybe that's another place where if you have
At 7,
a significant,
Yeah.
a significant point to make, maybe this is where you start to really.
Might be fun.
yeah, who knows?
I also
We'll see how
linked to,
convincing I am.
there's a video, like I linked in Board Docs to the page.
Yeah,
So there's more information and there's a video too, that just kind of like describes the process. and
Okay.
stuff. So there's just a bunch of information.
and then the other one I wanted to hear about was, revenue limits. Because it says something kind of wild. And,
It's
the
against.
WASB supports. Oh, wait, no, where, yeah, sorry, where? You found it? Oh, the WASB is opposed to state imposed revenue limits on school districts.
True.
Isn't that like a little wild?
No, not to me.
I mean, cause I mean, with that, I mean, a school district like ours could have it, we could be like, well, we need a revenue limit of 30 million.
So you realize that state imposed revenue limitations only happened about 10 or 15 years ago. with the
Oh, I thought it was
passage
the
of, like,
90s.
Act 10 or Act.
What?
It was in the nineties.
Yeah,
It was.
yeah, I thought it was in the 90s.
Oh my God, that's 30 something.
That's one of the moments where it feels like 10 years ago.
I mean, that's a huge debate about what the purpose and impact of revenue limits is, but.
It's very broad language, I would agree with that,
Yeah,
but
cause there's, I mean,
I'm
you
opposed to
wouldn't be
revenue
like,
limits.
I mean, again,
Districts
if you
are-
said, oh, we need 50 million, it's just like,
districts
you-
are in a lot of pain,
oh, no, I don't, no, and I'm not saying that the current revenue
Sure.
limits are fair.
right?
But it's saying no revenue limit. Not, you know, and again, they just passed a law that, or what was it, $300 per student per year for the next 100 years or something like that? Which, I mean, that's
The answer to
significant.
no revenue limit is voter power. Right? That's how you have, you know, control on school boards. If a school board were to overtax its community, the community would have the power to vote them out, as opposed to a bunch of, I mean, this is the argument, as opposed to a bunch of state representatives who aren't from our local community, telling our locally elected school board how
Yeah.
they're allowed to tax their local.
That
citizens.
could be overreach since it's locally
Oh.
controlled.
There's also a piece too, Ben, where it says what WASB supports, and there's some guidance, it's not just a
Right.
control. Like they talk about, we support setting revenue limits in these ways, or like basing it on these pieces, it's not just like throw it out. How many recommendations? Like.
Well,
A,
it says they
C,
also
D,
support
E,
it.
and F. Mhm.
You're gonna have
So
fun.
that would be part of that. If it was voted, it would also be the A, B, C,
Well,
E, and F.
but this, okay, sorry, the way I read this was, if that is not what's going to happen, we support this. Cause this,
Oh, no, I
this
think
makes
it's
me,
all one.
well,
So
no,
if
no,
you
no,
vote
but I'm
for
saying,
2.41.
when it says the WASB also supports the following, it makes me think, when they say that, well, we know this isn't gonna happen where we're not gonna have a revenue limit on something, unless
Correct.
something crazy happens in the Senate and
Potentially,
House, right?
Yeah, potentially. Here's
Then
some
they're saying, well,
recommendations.
how about this? That's what I'm reading,
Well,
but am I reading that
Oh,
wrong?
it could be.
as I read this, the troubling thing is that heading, or it's that sentence under 2.40 state cost control, what you're talking about.
Yeah,
But everything else I think is fine. There's no reason why you couldn't go in there and just say, look, I mean, and I support, the 2.40A. And I support, 2.41 if that's how you feel, which, talks about in some of the.
Oh,
issues,
is that
but,
it's different.
I would, ask. I mean, I never sat through a whole delegate assembly. I tried watching. And now you're stuck, but, it was all, no, look, it was Tamika, and before Tamika, it was, I think it was Teresa. And, it's an important job, but, you can always just, follow someone else making a motion. I would assume more make your own motion to modify it.
But so, okay, but 2.4 would be different than 2.41, you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, okay, got it, okay.
Take that
Yeah.
little, Robert's Rules card though with you,
Yeah.
so you know
So
the
I know.
order of motions,
Right.
cause someone there is gonna be serious parliamentarian.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think that I don't know if they do by smartphone yet, but they used to like by data game controller. You know, where you'd like pick out, I mean, you would use a controller to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They probably do, they have to be smart at it.
What I was
We
talking
do
about,
that
no, no,
in the Capitol, I mean, kind of, you see them all push a button and then you
Sure.
see. One thing.
Okay, any more discussion on the WASB resolutions?
Oh, you're gonna give it to me later.
Oh,
Oh,
my
feedback?
comments
Yeah.
on yeah, I need to process it still.
Got
There are concerns about, I wanna talk, I need to follow up with the person who actually proposed some of the original language. I just haven't had time
Got it.
to look at it. Yeah. But I'll email you.
I would be interested in that information as well.
I will share it with you too then.
Well, what they say is I think they, if I'm thinking about the same thing you're doing, they struck out and then wrote in what the law states, right?
Yeah.
Which is what is the least restrictive environment, right? That's the law.
Well, it's the least restrictive environment in which the child most benefits. Like so people talk
Yeah.
about least restrictive environment, but there's an additional consideration, and I think it's weighed very differently depending on the environment that you're in.
Right.
And most
and so
appropriate, right?
I suspect it's getting much more complicated as districts' budgets are getting much more constrained.
Yeah.
Because it is very hard to support, it's very hard to have a one-on-one aid when you have 70 children.
Right.
Yep, so I just need to work through it. I mean, and there are concerns with the seclusion and restraint language, from a disability advocacy perspective that. Again, I don't have the language in front of me, but the language seems to. The language doesn't suggest a viewpoint that we should be avoiding seclusion and restraint rather than preparing for and leaning in on that potentiality. So just some thoughts I had about language, but I'm not deep into seclusion and restraint. And my concept of inclusion can be a little top level. So I just need to dig into the language a little. and
Okay.
Make
Could
sure.
I just add that one of the things that I've struggled with as a public school employee is that, and I have a lot of conversations with friends who work at the state level around pie in the sky idealism versus boots on the ground reality. And I think one of the things that we should always consider is, like, yes, there's an ideal, but also what's actually happening and how do we make sure that we're addressing it appropriately? Because, you know, it's, as they say, it is happening. And so we need to figure out how in the process of possibly growing beyond that, we're dealing with what's happening right now.
Like I said, my head isn't heavily into it, but I followed up with my disability advocates. I agree with you that we have to think boots on the ground, but boots on the ground is also where people are stuck.
100%.
Sometimes it's important to have
Yep.
another perspective kind of push us out of our
100%.
orbits. Yeah, I know you live there. Yeah, so
My wondering is almost if it's like a separate piece, like what you're saying, like, so here's what's happening, so let's talk about professional development, how to do it
Yeah.
well, but then how do we stop it from happening?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
almost, yeah.
I mean, it's gonna happen. It's just, yeah. All right, anything else? Next on the agenda is the Ad hoc Equity Committee. We've had a couple meetings now, and we now have a set list of community members. Some are teachers and staff, some are parents in our community, and some are, actually, I think that about covers it, caregivers and staff. And so there's a list in the agenda of community members who wish to serve on the Equity Committee this year. And so that's what's before you. And I think I can make that motion. So I would move to approve the list of a dozen odd community members who wish to serve on the Ad hoc Equity Committee this year.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Aye. And with that, item 6A, board meeting debrief. Anybody have any thoughts to share about how tonight's meeting went?
The meeting started on time.
And it's only 30 minutes over.
It's true. It's a win in my.
I thought we had an excellent discussion around facilities.
Actually, I agree.
With a lot of participation and open minds, and I'm really grateful for that conversation. Very effective.
And I suspect we're going to continue to have conversations, right?
And we shared the table. I liked all of that.
And I appreciated how open they were as
Yeah.
well, because that was a lot of work and
Yep.
ideas that were developed with, you know, when Rob said what he said, I was like, I see that, but I don't feel that that was what was happening.
Yeah, yeah. All right, future agenda topics. Would anybody like to discuss any future agenda items? Anybody like?
You know, I mean, I do wonder about, would it be appropriate for us to say, like, let's figure out what are our priorities? Like, what do we perceive as our priorities? What
Like
do
a
we?
discussion to have?
Yes,
I mean,
I think we can probably just present that to Danielle. I think that, yeah.
wait, don't we have to vote on it? Cause if we vote on it, we don't have to bring it to Danielle, it just happens. Second,
What's the motion? What's the topic item?
to talk about our priorities for renovations,
Facilities.
facilities. Yeah, that's better.
recognizing that it's not necessarily like the straight arrow, this is what, you know,
Yeah, right.
it's just
Making
starting
sure
to
we-
conceptualize what our own priorities are.
Yep.
It would almost be nice to capture it too, so that we have like that brainstorming and that work and that, like, so we have.
And there might be some pre-work that you and the consultants could do to kind of put together a sort of basic menu of what what would be typically viewed as priorities in building development.
Yeah, I mean,
I think
Would help
Roger
drive
might be a great resource because he's helped us facilitate those conversations with other groups and it's been really. Like how we got here was like lots of spinning questions and lots of meetings.
And it was already on my list for
Yeah.
another agenda, so yeah. There is no opposition to this, so. Good. Just one last motion, something needs to be.
nice job today.
Yeah.
To adjourn.
Step. Not bad. And he's making faces, but
I'm making faces. You're making faces.
this is what you're doing.
Completely.
This is my Andy impression.